All right, hello everybody. Today I'm going to be joined by Kane B for a discussion about decision theory and especially Newcomb's problem. We both have kind of fairly similar views on that, but we're going to get into it. Kane B runs the YouTube channel Kane B, which you can check out. It's going to be in the description. Great channel. Something else I want to add to that, feel free, but how's it going, Kane?
Um, Normal. Everything's normal at the moment. I suppose. Yeah. So.
All right. Fair enough. So to start off, I was just going to briefly state the problem, which was originally posed by, well, at least in print, by Robert Nozick. It comes from William Newcomb originally. So the story goes. Anyway, it goes like this. You're in a room faced with two boxes. One is opaque, and you know that it contains either $0 or $1 million, or pounds, if you prefer. And there's another transparent box, and you can see the contents of it, and it contains $1,000. And you are then presented with a choice. Take the contents of the opaque box only, one box, or take the contents of both boxes, both the opaque box and the transparent box, two box. However, you also know that an extremely reliable, although not perfect, predictor made a prediction regarding which choice you will make. And if it predicted that you would take only the opaque box, if it predicted you would one box, it put $1 million in the opaque box. And if it predicted that you would take both boxes, two box, it put nothing in the opaque box. And the question is, what is the rational choice, or at least which would you do, one box or two box? And so that's the basic problem. The way Nozick originally discussed it in the article is called Newcomb's Problem, Two Principles of Choice. And there are conflicting intuitions regarding which choice is appropriate here. And we're going to get into that as we discuss some of the arguments. But yeah, what do you think about my presentation of the problem there? And if you want to state what your basic view is, and we'll get to it, I think.
Okay, that sounds like a great presentation of it. I don't have any disagreements with that. And well, I would take one box. That's what I would do. I don't know how much more detail you want when you ask me for my view, but that's what I would do in that situation. Actually, one of the things that Nozick said about this, which seems to be true, is he said that one of the things that's puzzling about this problem is that when you present it to people, they usually react with the view that it's just obvious what you should do, right? Like, it seems when you initially hear this problem, like, yeah, there isn't even a problem, right? Like when I initially encountered this problem, I was like, well, obviously I one box. What's the problem? I don't see why there's any consideration against that. It's obvious that I should one box. But the problem is that people are sort of split about 50-50, not exactly 50-50, but like about sort of evenly between those who think it's obvious that you should one box and those who think it's obvious that you should two box. So yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm also in the one boxer side. The way Nozick says in that paper, it's like to almost everyone it seems perfectly clear and obvious what should be done. The difficulty is that people seem to divide almost evenly on the problem, with large numbers thinking that the opposing half is just being silly. It turns out, though, that among philosophers, including among philosophers working in the field of like philosophy of action, I guess probably decision theory, I guess is, probability theory. I don't think they had a breakdown for decision theory specifically in the field paper survey, but there's a decent majority in favor of two boxing. And I know you recently made a video on kind of bucking consensus. But I mean, do you have any thoughts about two boxing being the popular view, especially since you think it's kind of like crazy?
Not really, because as far as I recall, it wasn't. It's not like there was a massive consensus in its favor. I mean, I don't know. I could be wrong about that. Maybe when you break it down by looking at people who specialize in decision theory, it is a massive consensus. I don't think I actually looked at that, but certainly for philosophers in general, wasn't it something like 30% one boxing, 35% two boxing? I can't remember like, exactly the numbers.
It's like 30, 38. But if you break it down by philosophy of action, which I think is the nearest kind of category that makes sense, it's worse. It's like 45, 23.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think either way, it's not like if it was, 90% in favor of two boxing, then, that would be, I don't know, actually. I mean, I find two boxing kind of puzzling. I'm not sure whether I would go as far as saying that it's irrational. I'm not really sure I would say that it's crazy. I did used to think it was crazy, but maybe my views have moderated a little bit. So I just don't know. I don't really know what to make of that, other than, I look, there's lots of arguments for two boxing, and I guess people are swayed by some of those arguments, and some people are just going to have the intuition that, whatever's in the boxes when I am presented with the problem is fixed, and there's nothing I can do about that. So obviously I should take both. I mean, it's understandable, right? And also other, like, if you're talking about philosophers, they're going to be committed to particular views in decision theory, right? So it might be the case that there are just overwhelming reasons to favor causal decision theory, and they think that causal decision theory entails that you should two box, and that might account for that as well.
Yeah, and I did want to. We're gonna get into some of these arguments, and with causal, it seems like that there's two camps that have come out of this in decision theory. I mean, there's two broad camps at least. There's some others that have proposed alternatives, or you have the pluralistic views as well. But the causal decision theorists generally are what they want to maximize is the sort of causal consequences of their action. They want to perform the action which will bring about, in a causal sense, the most desired outcome. And so when they look at this Newcomb's problem, for example, taking both boxes is going to be superior. It's not like taking one box will cause the million to be there, or cause them to be richer, even if they will in fact be richer if they take one box than if they take both. But it's that, like, they see the $1,000 there, that's something they can gain by their sort of action, by causally taking that box, whereas the other things that the evidentialist are just concerned with what is the sort of news value of different actions, what is likely to obtain if I take one box versus both boxes. So kind of rough way to put it, but they're not concerned only with sort of causally promoting the good or the desired outcome, but in a way, kind of, they're just concerned with getting it, or performing the action which is most likely a sign of the right outcome. And that is, I mean, in a way, part of the main disagreement or main difference between these two approaches. It's kind of a rough way to say it, but does that seem right to you? Like, causalists are concerned with.
So, yeah, I think so. I mean, actually, the way you put it was, you said, like, the evidential approach isn't concerned only with causality. I mean, it might be that they're not, in terms of like figuring out what the rational action is, they're not directly concerned with it at all. I mean, obviously, it so happens that in most actual case, in fact, in perhaps maybe all of the real world cases, the way to like maximize expected utility is to look at, what causes what and to look at causal connections. But in a case like Newcomb's problem, it just doesn't, causality is going to be irrelevant. But, yeah, so like, I mean, I guess the usual sort of view of a two-boxer would be, look, the predictor has made their prediction and has set what's in the boxes. And when I enter the room, there's nothing I can do to change that. So, if I take one box, I'm just leaving £1,000 or dollars that I could have. The scenario is fixed the minute I enter the room. So, why would you leave £1,000 just waiting on the table for you? I mean, no matter what choice you make, whether the predictor has put the million in the box or not, you're going to be better off with the extra 1,000. So you might as well take it. I guess that's the standard sort of line.
Yeah, it's a pretty standard sort of dominance argument, and there's something intuitive there, right? Because you could think, to put it another way, like there's some amount of bills in the room, right? Some amount of money in the room. Might as well take all of it. If you leave the $1,000, you're just taking 1,000 less than you could have taken, presumably. And I kind of get the intuition there, but I don't see how this, like, to me, I'm just going to say, yeah, if the person who takes all the money in the room does worse, right? The person who takes all the money in the room is very likely to be in a situation where there's only $1,000 in the room. And the person who doesn't take all the money in the room is very likely to be in a position where there's $1 million in the opaque box. So I don't think this, like you can maybe make this dominance argument more precise, or causal dominance really it has to be, because you can imagine there's more basic dominance arguments that don't work, and people talk about how it kind of leads to fatalistic conclusions. The causal dominance argument, which holds fixed states causally independent of your action, doesn't seem to me very compelling. I'm fine holding fixed states sort of probabilistically independent of my action, right? And then just saying I'm considering what the outcomes on each of those states that my action will or will likely produce. But yeah, I need some further reason to think that the causal dominance argument is correct, rather than the evidential version. To see what I'm getting at here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess this, like, I mean, so it's I guess connected to this point about like how we are evaluating counterfactuals. Like, so when I say, well, so when what the two boxer will say is they will take both boxes and they'll end up with £1,000, and they'll come out and they'll say like, well, look, if I had taken just one box, then I would have had nothing, because the minute I walked into the room, the boxes were fixed. Nothing I can do to change them at that point, right? There was nothing in box A, right? There was nothing in the opaque box. So if I had taken the opaque box, I would have walked out with nothing. But the problem is these kinds of counterfactual claims are sort of tricky, because a lot of it depends on what we're choosing to hold fixed when we evaluate the counterfactual. So, the way I'm looking at it is, well, in the scenario that we're describing, right, we have this predictor, and it's just part of the description of the scenario that the predictor is very reliable. It's right like 99.9% of the time. And so if you hold fixed the fact that you have this reliable predictor, and then you ask the question, what would have happened if you'd taken one box? Well, again, holding fixed the fact that the predictor is reliable, well, if you had taken one box, there would have been 1,000,000 in the box because the predictor would have predicted it and put the 1,000,000 in there. So, so the toolbox is going to say, well, you hold fixed what's in the boxes at the time you're in the room. And in that case, yeah, it's true. If you take one box, you're going to walk out with nothing because at the time you're in the room, if you're a two boxer, there was nothing in there. But I have a different way of evaluating the counterfactual. I'm going to say, well, no, you should hold fixed the reliability of the predictor, right? And then if you had one boxed, you would be walking out with 1,000,000. And it's tricky because counterfactuals in general are tricky. I tend to think they're very context dependent. I'm not sure that there really is a correct way of evaluating them. I think it's sort of up to us what we want to hold fixed. So it seems like we're not really going to, I kind of have the feeling that we're not going to be able to use these counterfactuals to figure out what the right thing to do is because, or at least what the rational thing to do is, because the counterfactuals are just as much up for dispute, as it were. So I don't know what to do with that. What I would say, though, is if you think of it in terms of not like what you would have said after you take the box, but just so if you kind of go back to when you initially face the problem before you make the decision, it seems like we would all agree that if I take both boxes, I'm going to get $1,000. So it seems a bit weird to say, after the fact, to then have this other counterfactual where it's like, well, if I had taken one box, I would have, received nothing. Because we're assuming when you initially sort of evaluate that situation, without knowledge of what's in the boxes, you sort of say, well, if I take both, I'll get 1,000. If I take one, I'll get 1,000,000. But then later, say after you've taken both and you've only got 1,000 and the 1,000,000 box is empty, you say, well, if I had taken one, I would have received nothing or something like that. I feel like what I said there was an incoherent ramble, so I'm not sure that actually made any sense at all. So I'm just going to stop there and ask, did what I say make any sense?
No, it did. I think it's. I think we'll come back to the sort of an indicative conditional, the prediction you can make beforehand, because that seems to me another just a reasonable argument for one boxing. And there is this disconnect between those indicative conditionals beforehand, the predictions you can make beforehand, and these sort of after the fact counterfactuals that you might assert. It seems to me that when someone says after the fact, suppose they took both and they'll say, had I taken only one, I would have received only 1,000. They're just, they're holding fixed the content of the opaque box is 0, right? Because in fact they observed it and saw that it was 0.
I think you mean if I'd taken one, I would have received nothing.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, that's what I meant.
You said I would have received only 1,000. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, good catch. And that's a fine enough counterfactual on its own, right? Given this and this and this, I would have received this. I just don't see how that's relevant to my decision in the moment, right? Of course, if I knew that there was nothing in the opaque box, that's I'm effectively facing a different decision problem, and in that case, I would just take both because I know the outcomes of both the actions I can take. I'm either getting 0 or 1,000. But in the situation, I don't know, if I want to assess a counterfactual, I'm going to hold fixed the things that I know about the problem that I'm facing, right? And potentially allow other things to vary if I'm varying the choice and other things vary with that, right? The things that I know in that problem minimally, or at least believe, are the details of the problem that I face, right? There's two boxes before me. The contents are either this or this, depending on the prediction of a very reliable predictor and so forth. And I'm going to hold that fixed when evaluating the different possibilities, right? What might or could have happened. And as you say, I think it's right? Had I, suppose I in fact decide to one box, well, I think had I or were I to two box instead, holding fixed those things I take to be true, minimally the details of the problem, very likely I would have been predicted to two box and would have received only 1,000. Right. So, and then if someone says, oh, no, but I'm evaluating this counterfactual where we sort of hold fixed also the contents of the box or the reliability or the prediction that was made, or maybe all of the past up until the choice, if you want to. I don't know why we would do that, but if they want to say that, then they can evaluate that counterfactual and it's going to be true, right? They're going to have these counterfactuals which say, holding fixed the past, and had I two bucks instead, I would have received 1,000,000 and 1,000, suppose. That seems fair enough as a conditional, but why are those conditionals guiding our rational choice? Especially since the counterfactual scenario you're considering, the one which satisfies the antecedent where the past is all the same, yet you act differently, is one in which the predictor got it wrong. And to me, that seems like the less likely counterfactual scenario, given what you know about the problem. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, so you can kind of put it in terms of like, if we're, I don't know if this necessarily helps, but like philosophers like to talk about, possible worlds and closest possible worlds and all this stuff. And it's like, well, in a way, there's sort of four options, right? In one world, you one box receive 1,000,000, in another you one box receive nothing, in another you two box receive 1,000, another you two box receive 1,000,000 and 1,000. And it's like, well, when you're thinking about what decision to make, I would have thought you don't really need to worry about the possible worlds that you can be pretty certain and do not actually obtain, right? So like we know that just given the way the problem is described, it is extremely unlikely that I'm in a world in which I one box and receive nothing, or a world in which I two box and receive both the 1,000,000 and the 1,000. So like I don't really need to consider those possibilities. But in that case, I'm just left with, well, I one box and receive 1,000,000, or I two box and receive 1,000. Might as well take the 1,000,000, right? So I guess that's kind of just another way of putting the point. It's like, I mean, to use this language, like the closest possible world in which it's true that I one box is a world in which I receive the 1,000,000, given how the scenario is described.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and it can be tricky talking about closest and possible worlds, but
right. Yeah.
Here it seems to be fine to think about it in terms of worlds which are most likely, given the way I'm varying the choice and the other things I take myself to know, right, or at least believe, right? So what sort of quote unquote world, or really it's kind of classes of world, because we're kind of silent on all the other things. What classes of worlds are most likely, given I make this choice, and all these details of the problem are held fixed, right? That I'm facing this sort of choice, reliable predictor, and so forth. And the class of worlds like that are most likely are going to be the ones in which I'm predicted correctly, right? In which, supposing I'm asking which, for where I take both boxes, right? Had I taken both boxes, and the details of the problem are the same, the most likely worlds, given that worlds most likely to be actual, are going to be ones in which I receive only 1,000, and I'm predicted to do so. And I mean, that just seems to me like I'm not going to pretend this is going to resolve the dispute, because people are just going to say, well, I don't care about those counterfactuals. I care about these other ones. This seems to me like how I'm going to guide my action, and that I think it's normally how we do anyway. But yeah, we'll get to some other arguments, I guess, for two boxing, one boxing. But
well, I guess
yeah.
that's sort of tricky when we say, it's normally how we do anyway, because I would have thought that in the vast majority of normal situations, both causal decision theory and evidential decision theory are going to be basic, they're going to deliver the same recommendations, right? So like in the vast majority of situations, of course, we base our action on the basis of like if we want some state A, right, and we know that B brings about A or B causes A, then you can get A by doing B, right? That's just generally how things work. So I guess the objection would be, well, that's what we normally do. I mean, the problem here is, of course, we have a case where these two different considerations come apart. But
Yeah, that's fair. I guess the thought was that when we're evaluating, maybe this is just anecdotal, but when we're evaluating sort of what the possible outcomes are for different actions, I'm normally thinking, well, what's likely if I do this action? What's likely if I do that action? And yeah, normally that's going to agree with more explicitly causalist reasoning. But I don't know. I find myself often asking questions about likelihood rather than just about causal consequences. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess people have different intuitions, or maybe they less reflectively think about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I do. I guess I would probably be in the I don't reflectively think about it camp. I maybe prefer not to think about the likelihood of actually achieving things I want. I don't know.
Yeah, this is fair. I mean, that's a fair another point to make, which is that these are all, even decision theorists probably don't sit around thinking about, okay, what are my credences here? What are my preferences? Let's calculate expected utility and so forth. But it's they're it still would be useful to use it as a guide, especially in more higher stakes cases and stuff like that. Anyway, I did want to talk about some other arguments. So an argument given by Jack Spencer and Ian Wells, something like, taking both boxes maximizes actual value. And the subject is in a position to know that taking both boxes maximizes actual value, and conditional on taking both boxes, the subject is still in a position to know that taking both boxes maximizes actual value. And those conditions are sufficient for two boxing being uniquely rational. And I don't know how much I want to get into that paper, but in there, it's kind of difficult to see how they to understand how actual value is being defined. Might be that it's some sort of counterfactual notion, and then that's going to bring us back to the previous problem. But the thought was that if you know how much, if you're in a stable position to know which action will maximize the actual value of which has the highest value result or whatever, then that action which maximizes actual value is the rational one. And they want to say taking both boxes maximizes actual value because the contents of both exceeds the contents of one. Maybe that's one way to put it. And that's going to be true even if you take both boxes. The contents of two exceeds both boxes contents of one. And so you should take both. Maybe I didn't phrase this in the most clear way, but do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure how that differs from the dominance argument. This seems like, so yeah, I'm just not sure. Maybe I'm not understanding what's meant by actual value, but like, yeah, I mean, if you right, if there's a million in the box, in the opaque box, then two boxing, assuming that you're holding fixed that there's a million in the opaque box, then of course two boxing is going to get you a million and 1,000. If there's not a million, then you're going to get just 1,000. But you know, how is that different from this dominance argument?
Yeah, let me find where they define actual value here, because I remember reading it, it's like it's not really clear. Yeah, here. The actual value of an option, sometimes called the value, utility, or actual utility of the option, is the value of the outcome that would result if the agent were to choose the option. For example, imagine that there are several boxes, each containing a sum of money. The agent is to choose one of the boxes. The outcome that would result if the agent were to choose a particular box is the agent receiving the sum of money contained therein. Money is all that matters, and money is linearly better than the actual value of choosing the box can be identified with the number of dollars contained therein. Right. So in Newcomb's problem, they're going to say, you know, if the opaque box contains nothing, then the actual value of taking only one box is 0. The actual value of taking both boxes is 1,000. And similarly, if the opaque box contains a million, the actual value of taking the opaque box is a million, and the actual value of taking both is a million and 1,000. And in both cases, so they'll say two boxing maximizes actual value, and so you should two box, something like that.
Right. Okay. So I guess my response would depend on, because when you gave that definition of actual value, it was sort of framed as a counterfactual.
Yes.
Like what would happen. So obviously, I mean, that's one point where I'll just come in and say, well, like, no, I'm assessing the counterfactuals holding fixed that the predictor is reliable. So actually, you know, if I had taken one box, I would have gotten a million. If I'd taken two boxes, I'd have gotten 1,000. But I mean, even putting that aside, I'm just like, well, okay, but like, why should I care about actual value? You know, why shouldn't I care about the fact that that all of the one boxes are walking away with 1,000,000 and all of you two boxes are walking away with 1,000? You know, it's like actual value doesn't seem to be doing very much to, you know, get you what you're looking for, right? I mean, given that we're all aiming to have as much money as possible, you know, me and my fellow one boxes seem to be doing much better at achieving that goal. So that would suggest that, you know, actual value isn't really the best sort of, you know, it's not really a very good idea to use that as a constraint on your action.
Right.
You know, so we just kind of come back to that same point that, like, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you were right that when it said the value that would result, the outcome of that would result, that's subjunctive. That's we're using modal language here, and it seems to me like they're trying to sneak in this assumption regarding the counterfactuals that the contents of the box are going to be held fixed, and that, you know, if those corresponding counterfactuals are true, that holding fixed it is this, and you one box you do this, and holding fixed it is this, and you two boxing, you know, you'll get this, and you kind of can set up a dominance argument that way, and we can use that sort of argument to guide our rational choice. I'm not going to accept the resulting argument, right? I don't. That sort of dominance argument that you might make, I don't think is correct. And I would accept the sort of argument involving subjunctives, but those aren't the subjunctives that I would use. So I don't think it, yeah, I'm probably on the same page. I don't think this makes any real progress on the dispute. And you might fair to point out that, like, okay, you can call this quote unquote actual value, but then you have to draw the connection between what the actual value is and what the rational choice is. And it seems to me that we have good reasons to think that the rational choice is, in some cases, not something which would quote unquote maximize actual value. And so I need some other reason to think that maximizing quote unquote actual value is right and these other approaches are wrong. It's kind of the way you're putting it, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if I would put it so strongly, but it's because, I mean, I guess as I hinted at earlier, you know, I don't know if I would say that two boxes are irrational. And I mean, this might be a point where we disagree, but it's just that, you know, like two boxing is, so just to clarify my own view here, I'm just clarifying. I mean, I find two boxing really weird, and I find like I can't sort of this. I feel this inability to, you know, in a sense, like empathize with two boxers. I find it very difficult to put myself in their shoes. You know, in like philosophy of this comes up in meta ethics. We sometimes they sometimes talk about. I don't know if you've come across this, ideally coherent eccentrics. So, you know, this like Sharon Street's Future Tuesday indifference and stuff like that. I find two boxing like really weird. It's way more weird even than Future Tuesday indifference and other. So for me, like ideally coherent eccentrics might be two boxes. They might be a great example. But my point is when I say they might be examples of ideally coherent eccentrics, is because I'm not really sure. Although I find it really weird, I'm just not sure what mistake they're making. And so that's why I don't think I would say that they're being irrational, because I feel like I should be able to say, okay, this is what you're wrong about, and I'm just not sure what they are wrong about. I mean, I've noted that like we're evaluating the counterfactuals differently, but like why would it be incorrect? I mean, you know, if they're evaluating those counterfactuals by holding fixed the like what's in the boxes, or holding fixed, you know, everything that's happened in the past from the point they go in the room, or I mean, like, okay, but why is that incorrect? Why would it be incorrect to do that? I'm just not sure. I mean, I really want two boxes to be incorrect because it's so strange to me, but I find that I just can't, yeah, I can't figure out in what way they are incorrect. So that's where I am now.
Yeah. I mean, it might come down to something irresolvable, because people might want different things out of a theory of like practical rationality. What is it to be practically rational? Is it, someone might say, you know, it just has to do with doing the action which promotes or brings about or is most likely to bring about your desired ends, right? Causally speaking. And someone else might say practical rationality has to do with performing the action which is most likely going to result in, not necessarily in a causal sense, the most desired outcome. And if that's sort of the bedrock, kind of what people are tying their notion of practical rationality to, then in a way people are talking about different things. And someone cares about practical rationality 1, and someone else cares about practical rationality 2. And I'm open to it being at the bottom this sort of non or substantive or perhaps irresolvable dispute. But I think more can be said to you know, argue in favor of that sort of latter approach, roughly speaking. But it may not be something that can be resolved. See what I'm saying there? Does this make sense?
Oh yeah, I get it, and maybe that's kind of what I'm, you know, yeah, that might be the sort of concern that I'm working with here. I mean, it's just like, if I'm going to say that someone's being irrational, I want to be able to specify what mistake they're making, and I I don't know, I can't really do that with two boxers. So, you know, that's all it comes down to for me.
Well, you might say something like, if they have some sort of commitments, like, you know, I want to perform the action which I want to have the most money, right, or something like that, right? Then arguably two boxing is counter to that goal, and in that sense they're being irrational, because they have a goal which is not sort of realized in that way, and they have sort of other commitments so that they could recognize that fact and so on. But there's kind of 2 points for potential dispute there. One is whether that's the actual goal that they have, because if it's not, you know, if someone just didn't want money, right?
Yeah,
then I'm not going to call them irrational.
I mean, I'm assuming that, like, so I guess we could just, like, assume that everybody in this situation wants money.
Right.
Otherwise, it just doesn't, like, you can't really get the problem started, can you? So,
right.
Yeah.
And then, or at least you could, switch to something else that people did want, I guess.
Right.
Well, I guess because they wouldn't be facing this decision problem, so because the preferences or whatever that individuate problems. But if the other point for dispute is, and this is probably where they will dispute, I guess, is that taking one box really maximizes money, right? That's the sort of, and maybe there's some dispute on, well, what does it mean to quote unquote maximize money? Is there some kind of factual notion? And then how are we assessing the counterfactuals? Is it just, the amount of money you in fact have, or the amount you expect to have? It gets kind of tricky, but I don't think the conversation ends there. But
well, I mean, yeah, I mean, and of course, that I mean, they're going to say, well, look, you one boxers are just leaving £1,000 on the table, so like that's just an obvious, really straightforward error if your goal is to maximize money. If you want money, then, like, why on earth would you just leave £1,000 on the table? But the problem is like, we can say to them, well, look, it's like predictably the case. Like, we all know what's going to happen, right? I go in there, I take one box, and I'm walking out with $1 million. And not only that, you're going to be able to predict that I will walk out with $1 million, right? Like, if you had to bet on it, you would bet that I'd be walking out with $1 million. So, like, they know all of this, and
right.
and they choose to two box, and it's like, well, okay. I mean, they know all of the facts. They accept the facts. They accept that, one boxers are much more likely to get $1 million than they are, but they don't want to leave the 1,000 on the table. I mean, I don't know. I just don't see where the error is. It's I mean, it's puzzling to me, but
well, I mean, you get richer by leaving the 1,000 on the table, right? I mean, you can predict you'll get richer by leaving 1,000 on the table. The people who do end up leaving the 1,000 on the table get richer. They get more money. I don't.
Yeah, but they agree with that. I mean, it's not like the two boxer is denying that.
Right, but then what are they valuing here? Right, it sounds like they're not valuing just having the most money. They're valuing something else, or they would have to. Otherwise, they'd be like inconsistent. See what I'm saying?
Well, again, though, it's they're just going to come back and say, yeah, but you're leaving 1,000 on the table. So, I mean,
right. Yeah, but
so I don't know. It just seems like an impasse. It seems like we agree on what all the facts are.
Right. So the one boxer is going to say, I would say, yeah, I agree that I'm leaving 1,000 on the table, but are you saying that we should take the 1,000 and then do the action which is not going to result in the most money? Like, it's not going to get us predictably rich and so on. If I care about getting predictably rich and getting rich, then I'm going to leave the money up the 1,000 on the table. That's the action that sort of results in that typically. And if they say, oh, no, but you're leaving the 1,000 on the table, I want to take that too. Their decision, and the sort of decision theory which rationalizes it, therefore is not in every case concerned with having the most money or getting the most money. And so either they're not sharing that value with me of getting the most money, or they're just being irrational because they're doing which by their life they could recognize doesn't get the most money. I think that's one way I would put it.
Yeah, okay.
Anyway, I did want to go over a couple more like two-boxer arguments and then come to, I guess I had a few more written down here. So this one I had seen not in print, but I mean, it might be in print somewhere, but a friend of mine had made this sort of argument, and I guess I'd seen this on one of those pages, like Less Wrong or something, which is that consider the variation where both of the boxes are transparent. And two-boxer might say, look, the one boxer reasoning seems to apply here. Yeah, take the person who takes only one box does better than the person who takes both. And so one boxer kind of evidential reasoning would rationalize taking only one box, even if both of the boxes are transparent. However, they'll say clearly taking both of them is rational in this case. And so the one boxer reasoning goes wrong. Do you get the example? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I get the example, but so it's really hard to like evaluate this, because I mean, so what I would say is, well, look, I mean, if we're just sort of really, you know, if we try to imagine this thought experiment as it's, you know, just take it at face value as it's being presented, then it's like, yeah, I mean, I would one box in that situation as well. Because we have to imagine a scenario where both boxes are transparent, but there's like a bunch of people they, you know, reliably, they're like all coming out with 1 million, you know. Now, obviously that would never happen, because once you can see inside the boxes, I mean, obviously I'm going to walk in and the box is going to be empty, because I'll two boxes. If you can see inside the boxes, then it's, I mean, the scenario like relies on, I guess on the fact that the box is opaque, right? Like if you take that part out, then you've got a completely different scenario. I mean, you'll either have a situation where you have like 1 million and 1,000, or I mean, much more likely, you're just going to have 1,000, right? I mean, that's what you'd actually be faced with when you walk in there. So then you might as well just take 1,000. But I mean, like insofar as the one box of reasoning applies in that case, I agree, and yeah, you should one box. It's just you won't be able to because of the way the scenario has been set up.
Yeah, I think I like this one. I want to take a step back and think like, okay, how are we? What is a decision problem, right? In subjective decision theory. Well, we're thinking about decision problems as collections of like credences and preferences, and asking, you know, given those credences and preferences and maybe some like principles of rationality and some other things like that, what option is preferable? Which option is most rational? And in this case, I want to say the way the variation is set up, you know, you have two transparent boxes, and you're asking, and you still have the same sort of preference ordering and so on, asking which rational given those features. It's not, in fact, it's set up as though it's one problem, but it isn't, right? Because in the case where the first box is empty, you have a credence about what's in fact in that box. And in the case where it's has $1 million in it, you have a different credence about what's in that box. And those are different gradiences that go into sort of your decision-making procedure. And so they correspond to different decision problems, because if you're individuating a decision problem by the credences and preferences, well, the credences are different here, right? And so these are different decision problems. So I want to say that the transparent box case isn't really one case, but two, right? There's one decision problem where there's nothing in the first box, and there's another one where there's a million in the first box. And I think in the sort of argument that I initially gave in favor of or against one boxing, they're treating it as one problem, and when it's not, right? The one box of reasoning, I think in both of those problems is just going to straightforwardly recommend taking both. In the problem where you're confident that there's nothing in the box, you know what the outcomes given each action are going to be. And it's in fact false that for each of those problems, one boxers do better. In fact, for each of them, one boxers do worse, right? The fact that of all the one boxers, quote unquote, facing both of those problems, the one boxers do better doesn't show that the one boxers facing each of those problems do better. In fact, one boxers facing each of them do worse, even if one boxers do better overall. It's kind of Simpson's paradox style structure there. Yeah, maybe my explanation here wasn't the most clear, but again, my thought is that there's two decision problems here that we're considering, and this one box of reasoning in each of them favors taking both boxes. Because again, one boxer is facing the first problem where you see nothing in the pick box do worse than two boxers facing that same problem. And one boxer is, facing the case where there's $1 million in the first box, do worse than two boxers facing that problem. And again, because we're individuating problems by the credences you have, and what's in the first box is sort of part of your evidence, you have credences about that. Therefore, these correspond to distinct decision problems. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. I suppose maybe I'm thinking about this thought experiment, and I'm like trying to go along with it as far as I can, and sort of saying, okay, so let me put it this way. Suppose that we have this transparent box variation, right? And suppose that there's 100, 1,000 people, right? And you see them face this problem, and I don't know, maybe you don't see how they work it out, but you just see them go into a room, and there are some one boxes. Now, I don't know how there could possibly be one boxes in this situation, but somehow there are, right? Somehow some of these people are one boxes, and all of the one boxes are walking out with 1 million, and all of the two boxes are walking out with 1,000. I mean, it seems to me like I should just one box, even if the boxes are transparent. Now, of course, I know I'm not going to, because I can see what's in both boxes, but I would still say, well, yeah, that's what I should do. Of course, I should one box. Well, I suppose I could close my eyes and and create a standard Newcomb problem. But assuming you can't do that, I mean, so this is the problem. It's like, well, yeah, if you, if I'm, what I'm trying to do is kind of split, put a wedge between my knowledge of what's in the box and my action. And in that case, it becomes very clear, I think, that you should still one box. It doesn't matter whether the boxes are transparent or not. If the one boxes are getting 1 million, obviously that's what I should do. But I don't know, maybe that's just the wrong way to think about this variation. I mean, you might be right that it's more helpful. It's certainly more realistic, I think, to frame it as two separate problems.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you might think that okay, suppose you knew that in some location a bunch of people were facing these decision problems, suppose there were 1,000 people, and then half of them went in and they saw the first box had 1,000,000, half of them went in and saw it had nothing. And suppose, although it's kind of crazy to suppose, that in each case, I guess it'd be 250 people one box and 250 people two box. And then you sort of watch the people coming out. Well, actually, in this case, there would be one boxes aren't getting more rich in this case, actually, because there would be 500 people coming out with $1 million in one box, 500 people coming out with $0 in one box. Sorry, 250 of each, and then 250 came out with $1 million and 1,000 to two box, and 250 came out with 1,000 two box. So actually, I'm not even sure that this favors, although I guess in that example, it wouldn't be 250 because we have to respect the predictor. So yeah, regardless, I don't know. I'm just thinking here. Point is, even if it is the case that the one boxers you see leaving the room or leaving their decision problems are getting have a lot more money than the two boxers, you're looking at the outcomes of two different decision problems at the same time. And if you only looked at the outcomes for one of them, the two boxes for that problem would be doing better, right? You'd see them with more riches than the one boxers facing the same problem. And if we're assessing, for a single decision problem at once, right? Not for the outcomes of two distinct decision problems, then I think the two boxers have the right to say, why ain't you rich? Because they're actually the ones getting more rich in that case, even if only by 1,000 in each case. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but I'm not sure, like, I don't know, is this, because I feel like it seems as though there's two decision problems, and which decision problem you face is, okay, how should I put this? I don't want to say determined by your action, because of course it's a matter of what the predictor has done beforehand. But like, okay, given the fact that the predictor is, reliable, right? We're assuming the predictor is reliable. So I'm going to say that the decision problem you face is determined, let's use scare quotes around that, by your action, right? And so the point is, if I know that I'm going to be facing this scenario, right? Somebody says to me, okay, there's these two transparent boxes, and there's a perfect predictor, or at least a very reliable predictor. If they predict that you two box, there's going to be only 1,000. If they predict that you one box, it's going to be 1,000,000. So I'm then like, okay, what should I do? And again, I can see this happening. So I can see people walking into the room, and the two boxes come out with 1,000, and the one boxes come out with 1,000,000. I feel like the one box reasoning is just the same in this case, and that I feel like I should just one box, and it's like when I walk in there, right? I mean, there's two separate things that could happen. There could be 1,000,000 in there, or there could be 1,000, only 1,000, and those are two different problems, very easy problems. Obviously, you take as much money as you can, but yeah, but I still feel like I should one box for the same reason as usual.
In the case where you're allowed to think about it beforehand, right? Before you even know which case you'll be facing, the first box has nothing and the first box has 1,000,000. I don't know, there might be some reason to then form the sincere intention to take only one box, because then you can be, if you think that's going to at least correlate with you then facing that variation of the problem where there's 1,000,000 in the first box and nothing in the second, in the 1,000 in the second, whatever. And then, one box of reasoning might endorse that. But I don't know if we want to think of this as a sequential decision problem or not, but if we're just thinking about it like the regular problem, forgetting any sort of preparation beforehand, if you're in the room, this prediction's already been made, but you are already are confident in the contents of the boxes. I'm not going to apply the counterfactual reasoning, for example, that I would otherwise apply, right? Because here I'm going to remember I wanted to hold fixed the sort of details of the problem when assessing the counterfactual. But in this case, I'm not just going to hold fixed the reliability of the predictor. I'm going to hold fixed the contents of the boxes because that's something I know, right? It's something I already know what the contents of the boxes are, right? It's like I would hold fixed the contents of the first box just as much as I would the second, as I did in the original case. And this whole thing about one boxes are doing better. Well, which one boxes? The one boxes facing the same problem that I am, or the one boxes, that come out of both? The one boxes facing the other problem, and I want to say that the one boxes facing the same problem that I am do worse than the two boxes. And there's of course, there's going to be different ways to compare the outcomes of like different classes of people facing similar problems, and it's going to be true that of all the one boxes facing both of these problems, compared to all of the two boxes facing both these problems, the one boxes will have more money on average. But I think that's the wrong metric. In fact, I think what's going on there if you're familiar at all with like Simpson's paradox style cases, I think that's exactly what's going on there. In both of the cases, both the decision problems, two boxes are doing better, even if one boxes have more money on average. In this case, though, since we care about, doing the best for the problem that we face, what matters is the individual cases, the two boxes are doing better rather than quote unquote one boxes having more money overall. But maybe that would take a little bit to explain. But the short thing is, I want to do I want to look at the sort of long run outcomes of the people facing the same problem. And the long run outcomes of the people facing the same problem favor two boxing. Whereas in the original Newcomb problem, it favors one boxing.
Okay.
So that's how I put it.
Yeah, I mean, I see your point. I don't know. Okay. I don't really have much to say. I think the one boxes are walking away with 1 million and the two boxes are walking away with 1,000, and that pretty much seals the deal for me. Well, because you say, well, no, the one boxes are walking away with either, one box is walking away with nothing. The two boxes would be, walking away like in the same situation I'm facing. The
same decision problem.
Walking away with 1,000. Yeah.
Because someone might say, wait a minute, but if you're like, why wouldn't we say that the original problem where the predictions are different corresponds to two different decision problems?
Yeah,
well, no, because those are different states independent of like the credences I have, right? Because we're individuating by the credences and preferences. And I don't know what the content of the box is in that case. So it doesn't, the different variation in what the contents are don't correspond to different decision problems.
I guess the thing is when I, obviously when I think about it from like my own point of view, facing that problem as I'm there, right, and as it's presented to me, then like there's no debate to be had. Like obviously I would take both boxes. I mean, there's just nothing else to do, right? But then I feel like in a way I'm sort of not engaging with the scenario. So I'm like, okay, how can I think about this in a way that allows me to engage with the scenario? And that's why I'm sort of imagining watching loads of other people go into this place, and I'm imagining the one boxers come out with 1 million, the two boxers come out with 1,000, and I'm like, well, I want to be a one boxer, Now, how that could possibly occur, I have no idea, but
well,
I want 1 million. You know,
I see that, but do you see how it can be the case that suppose you had this, like, I don't know, arena where there's just like hundreds of people facing the two problems, and of course the people who one box for the problem where there's nothing in the opaque box, almost everyone there is going to two box. Well, it's not opaque, sorry, the first box, almost everyone there is going to take both boxes. And in the case where there's $1 million in the first box, almost everyone facing that is going to one box. And when you see the people walking out, after collecting their money, you'll see the one boxes having, close to $1 million on average, and the two boxes having a little over 1,000 on average. And you're saying, well, I want to be among the first group, right? One boxes are doing better. Why wouldn't I one box? And then you have this tension between that and when you're actually in the situation looking, well, I know the different outcomes of my choice. If I take one box here, I'm definitely getting, nothing in the case where you see nothing in the first box, and 1,000 definitely if I, in that same case, if I take both. And there's just two boxing seems obviously correct, and I think it is correct in that case. And these sort of motivations seem at odds, and I think it's the first one that's incorrect in this case, because again, it's possible for it to be such that for both of the decision problems, two boxes do better, yet one boxes are walking away with more money overall for both of them combined in a way. That's sort of like a statistical possibility, and in this case, that's what would happen. And I want to say, you can't just say at the looking at it from above, say, well, I want to be among this group, because you haven't specified which decision problem you're going to face. And once you specify which decision problem you're going to face, and suppose you were only looking at the people walking out that face that particular problem.
Wait, why do I have to specify anything other than just the fact that there's, I can see the people who take one box have got $1 million, and the people who take two boxes have got 1,000. I'm not sure why I would have to have, like, why can't I just act on that? I wouldn't. In fact, I wouldn't be able to act on that. I know that's just a feature of my psychology. Obviously, I go into the room, I'm obviously going to take two boxes, because if I can see what's in them, then, I can just see that there's 1,000 there. So like, but if I'm trying to bracket that, then it's like, okay.
Because the people walking out are facing two different problems. So I think it's a mistake to think, well, okay, so what if they're facing two different problems? I can look at the result of the quote unquote two boxes and the result of the one boxes. Really, that's kind of hiding the fact that there are two boxes facing the first problem and two boxes facing the second problem, and same for one boxes, and treating them as though they're all facing the same problem, and saying, well, the people who take both boxes do worse, and the people who take one box do better, and in terms of the actual money they're carrying out. And so I want to be among that group that take only one box.
Okay, how about?
Yeah.
Sorry,
go ahead. Go.
So how about this counterfactual? If I had one box, I would have faced the problem, like, let's call it, problem A, right, where there's $1 million in the box. So if I had one box, I would have faced that problem. Is that counterfactual true or false?
Well, it depends, right? So if we're evaluating from the sort of perspective of the person facing the problem, right, where the contents of the first box are in evidence, right, that's the sort of thing that they're going to fix just as much as the reliability of the predictor, the contents of the second box, and so on, right? If you're just asking, given only that I'm facing one of these problems, and suppose had I one box, or had I take only one box, probably then I I would be facing the problem where there's $1,000,000 in the first box, right? So you can set up that sort of counterfactual, which will be true, or at least probably true in the sense that you want to say, had I one box or were I to one box, and where the only things we hold fixed is like that you're facing one of these problems, but we're not holding fixed which one that is. Then if it's true, then probably you would be facing the one where there's $1,000,000 in the first box. But that's not the sort of counterfactual that I think is relevant when you're facing the problem, right? Because for the same reason we talked about before, I want to evaluate the counterfactuals, sort of holding fixed the details of the problem that I'm facing, right? You wanted to hold fixed the reliability predictor. You wanted to hold fixed the contents of the transparent box, and the other details of the problem. I want to do the same here, right? When I'm evaluating this counterfactuals, like in order to make my choice, I'm going to be holding fixed the contents of both of the transparent boxes, I'm going to also want to hold fixed the reliability of the predictor, but in fact, because I'm certain about the contents of the boxes, when I evaluate the counterfactual, it is going to be true that in the counterfactual case, the predictor got it wrong, right? But supposing they got it right in the actual case. But
what if we just modify the scenario so that
follow.
the predictor is 100% accurate?
In the case where the predictor is in the case where the predictor is 100% accurate, you don't face a decision problem, because from your perspective, you already know the outcome of your choice, right? In other words,
but no, I mean when you're evaluating this counterfactual. So like imagine a scenario where the predictor is 100% accurate, and the boxes are transparent. I mean, and I say, well, if I had one box, I would have received 1,000,000.
Right.
I mean, how would you evaluate that? Do you think that's true or false?
So
it seems like that has to come out as true. Otherwise, you're just not engaging with the scenario, right? You're just imagining a different scenario.
Wait, which counterfactual are you looking at? The one where you're sort of not holding fixed
if
which
I
problem
had,
you're facing, or the one where you are?
So the case where we have transparent boxes,
right?
If I had one box, I would have received 1,000,000.
Given only that you're facing one of those problems, then that's going to be true. But if you're holding fixed which problem it is you're facing, then the antecedent is going to be impossible, right? In the case of it's a perfect predictor. So I want to say something like this. Suppose I'm facing the quote unquote problem, although I don't think it's a genuine distinct problem, where there's nothing in the first box and there's 1,000 in the second, and it's a perfect predictor, right? 100% reliability. I know necessarily if they predict A, then I would take one, then I'll take one. So, well, I know that I'm going to take. What did I say? There was nothing in the first box, so then I know I'm going to take both. But I might ask myself, had I taken only one, what would I have gotten? Well, in that case, I'm going to hold fixed A, the reliability of the predictor, which is perfect, and B, the contents of the boxes, which I'm like, that's part of the decision problem that I take myself to know, and then vary the choice. Those three things actually entail a contradiction, right?
Yeah, that
the choice couldn't have been
like
another one.
It just
so there's
like
no possible world. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's sort of. I don't know, dude. It just seems like you're just like refusing to engage with the example. I mean, because we can imagine it like we can imagine a scenario where the predictor predicts that you take one box and you go in and take one box and then you walk out with 1,000,000. I mean, that's a possible scenario. But you're saying, oh well, that doesn't count because it's not the same decision problem, and I'm choosing to hold fixed the exact decision problem that I'm facing when I'm evaluating the counterfactual. I mean, okay, fine. I like. No, I don't know. I don't know if that's like.
No, as I said, we can evaluate that other counterfactual where we suppose we're just holding fixed that we're facing one of these problems, and in that case, I'm on the same page, right? you say, had I two boxed, I would have received a million. That's true, because had you two boxed, you would have been facing that decision problem where you're predicted to, sorry, had I one box, you would have been facing that decision problem where you predicted one box and so on. And that's all fine, right? I'm on board with that.
Okay.
The problem is, though, is that when you're in fact facing the problem, like in the original case, in the regular Newcomb's problem, when we were thinking about how we're gonna, what sort of counterfactuals we're gonna use to sort of guide our decision here, we were thinking, well, I want to hold fixed the sort of details of the problem that I'm facing, kind of allow my choice to vary, and whatever else might vary with that, not just causally, but probabilistically, and that will vary the prediction that was made and so on. And we weren't saying, oh, I'm going to be sort of neutral on precisely which decision problem I'm making. Like, supposing I'm either facing this decision problem or, like, I don't know, some other decision problem. And if I only knew that, and then suppose I did this action or that action, sort of what's the likely outcome? Why would that have any bearing on the problem that I'm in fact facing? Or that's like, it's like intentionally using less information than I have to evaluate the counterfactual relevant to my choice.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And I want to say the same here. I want to use kind of all the information I have sort of relevant to my choice, which is going to include the contents of the boxes, the reliability of the predictor, and so on. And those are the things we're going to hold fixed when evaluating the counterfactual relevant to guiding my choice for that decision problem that I'm in fact facing. I think it's kind of the same thing. See what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the one thing that I'm like, I don't know if this makes a difference. It's just like, and this is very clear in the perfect predictor case. It's that it seems like the decision that you make the choice you make brings it about what decision problem you face. So it seems like that is something we should be able to vary. I don't know. Maybe I'm not expressing that right, but like if we're saying that these are two separate decision problems, but then given the fact that we know that like what's in the boxes is going to be, again, you can't really say determined, but I'm going to say determined with scare quotes, but determined with scare quotes by the decision you make. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Maybe it'd be helpful to think of the relation to the perfect predictor version of the like regular Newcomb's problem, because in that case, sometimes people have put it this way: it's like you're really just looking at a menu of options, right? I take one box and I get the million, or I take two boxes and I get 1,000, and sort of given the problem I'm facing, I can just be certain of that, right?
Yeah.
I know both of those things are true, and you might want to say that the person facing this problem, you might want to try to say the same thing here, except that in this case, it's only a menu of one option, right? With the perfect predictor in the transparent case, you already know what the option is you're going to take, right? There's not another option. And accordingly, I think a genuine decision problem has to have there have to be at least two actions consistent with your evidence, consistent with the sort of credences you have entering when facing the problem. And there's only one in this case. And so you don't face a genuine decision problem. But kind of leaving that aside, I forget exactly where I was going to go with this. But you see the relevant difference between this and the regular Newcomb case, even when it's a perfect predictor, which is that in this case, the counterfactual is just kind of vacuous. It has an impossible antecedent. There's only one action. There's only one outcome consistent with your evidence. So if you try to evaluate with the counterfactuals, it's just going to be vacuous. And if you want to evaluate a different sort of counterfactual, then I'm going to say you're evaluating the counterfactuals differently than you were in the regular Newcomb's case, because we were just doing the same thing, holding fixed kind of details of the problem, allowing the choice to vary, and the stuff that varies with that to vary as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you want to stick around on that because there's some more arguments and then
Oh no, I mean, look, at the end of the day, I mean,
yeah,
it's very simple, isn't it? Because if somebody shows you a box that may or may not have 1 million in it and another box that's got 1,000 and you can see both of them, I mean, you're definitely going to take both. So
right, yeah.
I mean, this example is like, yeah.
Yeah, my response is
it's
we're agreement there. I just don't think that I think that the one box of reasoning that is normally applied in like the regular Newcomb case doesn't go wrong when applied here,
right.
either by ain'cha rich or stuff like that. I think thinking about it in terms of, and then also the counterfactual stuff. So I think thinking about it in terms of two problems as it really is, and then applying sort of same reasoning, I think one boxing still comes out ahead in terms of the reasoning. But in that case, in the transparent case, you two box because, and the one box of reasoning endorses, supports that. But I don't know, we could talk about that more. But
let me put it this way then. If your response works, then I like that very much, and I can just go ahead and two box easy in that. But if your response doesn't work, I'll just fall back on saying no. I think I should one box in that case as well, even though I won't. So there you go. I've got two options there.
Fair enough. So I did another argument. I actually had J. Dimitri Gallo on the channel a few months ago. We sort of had a conversation about some of this stuff, and he gave this argument in this paper. I think it's called, I can pull it up right now. It is called Riches and Rationality. Yeah. So he says something like this: we shouldn't judge rationality, what the rational action is in Newcomb's problem, by like the amount of long-term wealth that someone has or like generates, because as Lewis would say, sometimes irrationality gets rewarded and so on. But instead we should judge it by long-term wealth creation, right? So for the person who one boxes each time and gets nearly $1 million on average, suppose, they were irrational because on the run that they took, they would have earned 1,000 more each time by taking both boxes. On the other hand, the person who two boxes each time and gets a little bit more than $1,000 on average, they were rational because on the run that they took, they would have received $1,000 less each time by taking only one box. And so we're talking about the run they took, including, that just kind of holds fixed the contents of the boxes in the transparent and the prediction that was made. What do you think about this?
I think it sounds like this is again coming down to how we evaluate the counterfactuals. So I'm going to deny that they would have earned 1,000 more by taking both boxes, because they wouldn't have been getting the 1 million.
Right. The person who, had you acted differently, you probably wouldn't have been on the same run, right, of like predictions. So like, right. I want to grant that, like, yeah, holding fixed all the predictions that were made, that this person who two boxes for all those predictions does better than the person who one boxes for all those predictions. But you can't, I'm not going to accept the inference from that to therefore two boxing is rational. And so, because I'm going to say, well, that's true, right? The person who two boxes is very likely not facing the same run that the person who one boxes each time does. And suppose you in fact two box and got 1,000 each time, or a little bit more than 1,000 on average. That same person, had they one boxed each time, very likely is earning close to $1 million on average. And also, this is something you can predict beforehand, right? On the run that I'm going to take, if I one box each time, probably I'm going to be on the run where I'm predicted to do so each time and get, a little close to $1 million on average. And and then alternatively beforehand, if I'm going to two box each time, probably I'm going to be on a different sort of run where I'm predicted to 2 bucks each time, more or less, and I'll earn a little bit over 1,000 on average. And yeah, I just either we're just going back to this thing about, well, which subjunctives are relevant to the decision, or how are we evaluating subjunctives? Because the disagreement might be either on how to evaluate the subjunctives, or on which subjunctives are relevant, even if we agree on how to evaluate them. And yeah, it doesn't seem to be anything new here, but
No, I don't think so. I mean, if if somebody says, well, on the run that the one boxer had, if they had two boxed, they would have been getting 1,000 more each time. I mean,
right.
It seems like, well, you just have to be assuming then that either the predictor turns out not to be reliable, right? Like
Right.
so you'd have to have it that the predictor isn't right, or maybe the predictor is reliable, but just for some reason you're special, right? Like, and it just so happens to be unable to predict you, or something like that, which just seems to be changing the scenario. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
but you can even make it. It's a good point though, and you can make it even stronger, right? Suppose everyone, right? Consider the counterfactual where everyone facing these problems had acted differently. What are we going to say then, right? Are we going to hold fixed all the runs that they took, such that whereas in the actual world, when the predictor is extremely reliable, and when we assess this counterfactual, they're just going to follow that they're extremely unreliable, right? Because for everyone, if they got it 99% in the actual world, now they're getting it 1% right, right? Because we're kind of flipping all the choices that were made, but holding fixed all the predictions. I mean, you can consider I guess strictly, is that a possible world? I mean, it depends on exactly how we're understanding reliability here, because if these are all the predictions that are made, and the reliability is saying something about all the predictions that it makes, then that's not really possible. But if there's something else about reliability that maybe that's consistent with, then that's fine. But it's just so unlikely,
I guess
right?
it could be like I don't know, you might be using a propensity interpretation of probability or something like that, and then
right.
Understanding reliability in those terms, maybe that would work.
Yeah, maybe it's consistent depending on how we're understanding reliability, but it's so unlikely that that's the way the world would be, only varying the choice that you make, varying the choice but not the prediction. Okay, I guess that, you can infer that that's the way it would be if that's possible, but why would that be relevant to your decision? It seems to be we're in the same position we were with respect to other sort of dominance and counterfactual arguments. Yeah, so I want to look at, here's another sort of, this might collapse into some of the same things, but this one was given by John Martin Fisher. I don't remember, I had him on, but I don't remember if maybe I brought up something briefly about this, decision problems, but didn't really talk about that. So he says something like, whatever you have the power to actualize now, right, it must be an extension of the actual past, right? So nothing you can do now can be such that it's sort of inconsistent with the way the past was. And so if the predictor put $1 million in the opaque box, you now only have the ability to actualize worlds in which there's in which you earn $1 million, or you earn $1 million and 1,000. And if the predictor put 0 in the opaque box, you now only have the ability to actualize worlds in which you earn 0 or 1,000. And since 2-boxing earns more in each case, 2-boxing is rational. That's the sort of argument that he makes in which paper was it?
I mean, I don't know the details of this argument, but I feel like I'm going to have a problem with this idea of actualizing worlds, because so when we talk about like causality, I mean, I can say, look, there's no way I can causally affect what the predictor will do, because I mean, and I'm just assuming that you know, we're like, I'm assuming for the sake of argument here, like an objectivist view of causality where we all agree that causes precede effects or something like that. I actually think that's questionable. And you know, that maybe is another problem, another point that might be worth talking about. But you know, I'm kind of happy to just go along with it, right? Like I'm happy to go along with the usual like objectivist causal description. But when you talk about like actualizing worlds, I mean, what does that mean? And why shouldn't it be the case that, you know, I'm able to actualize a world in which the predictor put 1 million in the box by one boxing, right? So like I can't cause the predictor to put the 1 million in the box by one boxing. My decision can't cause the predictor to do anything, but why shouldn't my decision actualize a world in which it was the case that the predictor put 1 million in my box? I mean, it depends on what it's supposed to mean when we talk about like actualizing worlds, but that seems kind of unclear, right?
Yeah, that's really fair. I think it's probably this thought, you know, it might come back to things about the fixity of the past and stuff. Like, as people are going to say, like the past is kind of over and done with. It is a certain way, so to speak. And whereas in some relevant respect, the future is open, and the way the world is, or which sort of class of possible worlds the actual world belongs to, you have the power in making a choice to sort of narrow that down, right? Because prior to your choice, the way the quote unquote actual world is in totality, right, including all the past, present, future, whatever, is among the possible worlds which share that past, but also, you know, it's sort of undecided at that point whether it's one of those possible worlds in which you choose A or B, right? And by making a particular choice rather than some other, now you've kind of narrowed down where in the larger modal space the actual world is. Mm-hmm. The worlds which share the past and you choose A, and the worlds which share the past and you choose B, and stuff like that. I actually don't think this is a very good way to think about it, but does that kind of illustrate it a little bit?
Yeah, it does. I'm curious though. Do you think that, like on this kind of view, if it were to turn out that determinism is true, would that just be it for decision theory? Would there be no point? Because of course, if determinism is true, then the future is fixed as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, would you just be like, okay, well, it's, you know,
yeah,
decision theory is for the garbage. It's no point.
There are some people who would say that genuine decision problems are incompatible with determinism. And I think that's just obviously wrong. I don't like, right. It seems to me that I can still weigh my options. You know, given the certain evidence I have, I can still input those things into a decision problem, even if I affirm determinism and so forth. It seems like I'm no worse off to consider the rationality of different options and so forth, expected outcomes of different options, even if I'm given the past determined to perform one of those actions and to gain a certain result. Okay, and I don't think that's any worse than there being a fact of the matter about the future, even if the future doesn't follow deterministically from the past. So
I guess the way to put it is, it seems to me that what matters is not the fact that the future is like, you know, metaphysically open, but that it's epistemically open, as it were. Right. Like, you know, we don't know. And of course, the same is true for, you know, the past. It's like, okay, well, you know, the past is metaphysically fixed. Okay, can't change it now, but it's epistemically open in certain respects. And so if that's enough to, you know, like allow us to have decision theory with respect to things we do in the future, then I wonder if this, like, I could just make the same point here and say, well, you know, like, yeah, the past is the way it is. There's nothing I can do to change that, like, you know, metaphysically, but it's still epistemically open. I don't know what the predictor predicted, but I do know that the predictor is extremely reliable, and, you know, I know all of these other things. I don't know if that answers the problem, but
No. I think that's right. In fact, I think the person who endorses this sort of reasoning that says like, oh, the past is kind of fixed, and so there's nothing there is a way the past was, so to speak. Nothing I can do about it. I think that it's almost a sort of fatalism, right? Because you can say the same about the future, except changing the tense, right? There is a way the future will be. I'm not going to be able to change the future, right? If you think there's a like future tense propositions are like truth apps, right? You think there's some fact of the matter about what I will do tomorrow. You could say, well, nothing I do now is going to change that fact. And so you can sort of, in the way that a lot of people want to do when evaluating these decision problems and holding fixed the past, oh, I can hold fixed the future. That seems to me just as good. I don't like why would this be any more out of place? That seems to me like it's just a sort of fatalism to me. Now there are different. So another way to put it is, I don't think there's an asymmetry between the past and the future in terms of what the facts are, like what will happen or what did happen. There are asymmetries of other sorts. There's an epistemic asymmetry. We know more about the past than we do about the future. There's a sort of decision theoretic sort of asymmetry, which is that facts about the past are sort of more often included in the decision problem. So we'll kind of hold more things fixed there. There's perhaps a causal asymmetry. Causes, at least typically, if not invariably, precede their effects. But I don't think, I just have to see when they want to hold the past fixed, when evaluating these, which the rational action is, which asymmetry is relevant there. If it's the causal one, I don't know why that would be the thing that that would motivate holding fixed the past when evaluating these kind of factuals or evaluating rational action. If it's any of the others though, whether it's the details of the decision problem, whether it's the sort of epistemic stuff, or whether it's the what the facts are, I don't think any of those are going to motivate holding the past fixed any more than the future when it comes to the predictor and so forth like that. So I guess there's a lot to talk about there, but it's not clear, what to me at least, what the motivation for this fixity principle is, or what even the principle is supposed to be exactly. Mm-hmm. It's just a way to something you do when evaluating the counterfactuals. It's like we hold these facts fixed when evaluating the counterfactuals and of your actions and so forth, and those are the counterfactuals relevant to determining rational choice. Well, then if that's it, then we're just going to come back to the previous problem. And if they say that, well, no, but the past being fixed in a way kind of supports taking these counterfactuals to be relevant, I'd have to see why that is, because if it's any of those things that I'm talking about, causal asymmetry, epistemic asymmetry, sort of decision theoretic asymmetry, or a sensible like fact of the matter asymmetry, I don't think any of those motivate it. So I just have to see what else might motivate this fixity principle. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I kind of rambled on, but
no, that's okay.
So I had two more kind of two-boxer arguments that I wanted to get through. Then we've kind of been talking about some one-boxer arguments too, but I wrote some down. Cool. Another two-boxer one is the well-wishing friend one. So this one comes from, I think, originally from George Schlesinger. That paper was called, what is it called? That paper was called The Unpredictability of Free Choices. Yeah. Anyway, the idea is pretty straightforward. You might suppose that you have a friend in the room with you that can see the contents of the opaque box, or in some way they know what the contents are. and they're given the option to make a recommendation to you without telling you what's in that box. And no matter what they see or what they know the box to contain, they're going to recommend that you take both boxes. And the idea is supposed to be they have strictly more information than you. More information certainly puts them in a better position to make a recommendation of choice. They're going to recommend taking both, so you should follow the recommendation. And you can reason in this way, even if there is no friend present, right? You can reason that if there were such a friend present, that they would make that recommendation and so on.
I think we would presumably have to, just to clarify the way this argument works, we're assuming that the friend isn't telling you what's in the box. They're just saying whether you should take one or take two. And I mean, they're going to say that you should take two, but they're not revealing the contents of the box.
Right. Yeah, that's right. That's an important clarification, because if they reveal it, then effectively you're facing the transparent box case, and it might vary what the rational action is there, as I think it would. So they're not really giving you any more information. They're just making a recommendation for what to take. And you could know that they would make that recommendation even without knowing what's in the box and without them being there. What do you think about this?
Well, I don't know. I guess there's a few things to say. I mean, so it's always struck me, I suppose, that like and maybe this is the case for all like one boxer and two boxer arguments, that I increasingly feel like these arguments are maybe that a lot of these arguments are just sort of restating the facts of the case. Because when I initially hear this, I think, well, yeah, I mean, this is basically just restating the point that two boxing dominates one boxing. Like in the sense that, okay, yeah, well, they can see both boxes. Obviously, they're going to tell you to take the 1,000 as well. I guess, I mean, I assume that, so really this is going to come down to it's like a version of the transparent box case. It's just where somebody else is facing the transparent boxes. So I guess you could kind of apply the same response to this case, I think.
Yeah. So the friend is effectively, if there is a friend there, or you could think of them hypothetically being there, they would be facing effectively the transparent box case. I guess they're thinking about what they would take and then just facing that problem and then making that recommendation to the other person. But I don't know, you have to draw this connection between what's rational for them to do facing the problem that they would be facing. You have to draw the connection between that and, whether it's rational for you facing, strictly speaking, a different decision problem to do the same thing. And it doesn't follow, strictly speaking, in general. I would want to know why it would follow in this case. So people are going to say things like, well, the friend has more information than you, so they're in a better position to make the right choice or something like that. I don't see, the right choice. I could put it another way. I know that if I listen to the friend, I'm going to do worse than I would have if I didn't listen to the friend, and so on.
Right, yeah.
So, in what sense is it the right choice? The people who listen to their friend do worse, and all the same one box arguments apply. So it might just be a stalemate, I guess, as a few of these things are. But to me, I need to see the connection between what's rational for them to take or recommend and what's rational for me to do with different evidence. And interestingly, though, I do want to point out that in the case where the predictor is perfect, the friend already knows what I'm going to choose. Right. So in a way, they wouldn't really have any motivation to, I would suspect, recommend taking both. They already know whether I'm going to take both or only one. But it's kind of weird thinking about, okay, in the 99.99 case,
Yeah,
They're
that's
not certain.
that's a
They
good
might,
point.
they're very confident in what I'm already going to choose. Now they might think that what about the 70% case? In that case, they might think that them saying something will, you know, make it more likely that I would take both than had they not, or something like that. And so it might be rational for them to make the recommendation. But regardless, and actually, this was a point made by William Lane Craig in his article from 1987. Yeah, I don't see the connection between what's rational for the person who can see the contents of the boxes to choose and perhaps even recommend, and what's rational for me to do with the evidence that I have. Because again, if I listen to them when they're recommending taking both boxes, I'm predictably doing worse.
I mean, I do get the intuition, to be fair. Like,
yeah.
So generally speaking, when it's better to act on more information, right? Like the more information that you have, the better off you are. So, if you know that somebody else has more information than you, it kind of makes sense to like defer to their recommendations, at least assuming that they know what your goals are. But I mean, like, this is just an unusual scenario, and like you say, I can see that when people listen to their friends, they end up worse off. So it looks like a pretty easy case where it's like, well, actually, no, you don't want to be listening to the person who has more information in this case. That's not going to make you better off. So yeah, I don't think in this particular case, I think more would need to be said about what the connection is, or about like why that connection is supposed to be universal, maybe. Yeah.
I think one of the things I'm going to bite the bullet on, though, is this stuff about managing the news. So like if I thought my learning some information would likely result in some undesirable outcome, then I might want to avoid gaining that information. So for example, suppose I'm facing Newcomb's problem and I'm given the option of, before I make my choice, revealing the contents of the opaque box. I don't want to do it because I know that if I'm going to do that, I'm probably going to end up taking both. I'm probably going to end up getting only 1,000. Right. So I'm actually going to want to make my choice absent that information, I think. And I think there are other cases, maybe not quite like this, in which we would say kind of the same thing. If you knew that, whether you knew some information correlated strongly with, whether the world blew up, right? Even if it didn't cause it. I don't want to know that information, because my knowing it, if I know it, probably the world is going to blow up and so on. And it's kind of the same thing here. If I know this information, probably I'm only getting 1,000 and so on. Now, I
suppose it's not that unusual. I mean, I don't know, actually, I'm just saying this. I'm thinking these are not really similar cases, but I mean, it's not too difficult to find cases where we choose not to have information. I mean, I suppose, to be fair, the examples I'm thinking of are more cases where like the information itself just makes you feel bad. Like if somebody was to, I don't know, some people, for instance, don't like knowing their partner's sexual history. I don't really care about that sort of thing personally, but that's an example of like information that people might not want to know. So yeah, I don't know if there are any realistic scenarios where like learning information would, lead to negative outcomes in the way that it would in a Newcomb problem. But it's not necessarily always true that like more information is good for you, or that you always want to act on the basis of more information.
Yeah, I think it isn't. But yeah, it's true that it's quite difficult to come up with realistic cases. But just in the abstract, if you having that more information, you are pretty confident beforehand that the result will be less desirable. Your result isn't necessarily causal here, right? That having that information correlates with something you prefer not to be the case. That is at least some reason to not want to have that information. And that I would say that's true in this Newcomb case, and as well in the case where you knowing some fact correlated with the world blowing up. It's kind of the same thing. I wouldn't want to know that information because I don't want the world to blow up, even if it doesn't. My knowing it doesn't cause it correlates with it. All the same sort of evidentialist motivations apply and so on. I'd rather not have the information. In this case, in the Newcomb case, having that information tells you something unfortunate about, what you're likely to do and how much money you're likely to have and so on. But it's kind of the same thing in principle as the world blowing up case. In the case with a friend, though, you're not getting the additional information, but you're taking the advice from someone who has it in a way. And well, I'm just going to end up saying the same things I already said about it. I don't think I don't see the connection between what's rational for them and what's rational for me. And I don't accept the thought that what's rational for me, someone with strictly more information than me is always in a better position to tell me what's rational for me to do. I don't accept that. So I need some additional reason for that, I guess.
I mean, maybe one way to think about this is that, like, imagine that, you were told you're going to face a Newcomb type problem, but 50% of people get the transparent box, 50% of people get the opaque box. If I was to walk into the room with the transparent box, I would think to myself, "Oh God, I wish I'd been in a situation where I had less information," right? Like, I mean, I can want that for myself. So I'm in a position where it's like, I'm better informed, but I don't want to be in that position. I don't want to be in this position where I'm acting on more information because it's maybe worse off. Now, I don't know. I mean, maybe, I guess, two boxers wouldn't have the same intuition about this case. I guess they wouldn't care whether the box is transparent or not. But yeah, so for me, I don't see my friend as being in a better position or like in a position where I want to take their advice. That makes sense.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in the same way that people who take both boxes tend to do worse. And if we're looking at this, the case that you're talking about, people who know about the contents of the box tend to do worse. And I don't want to be a two boxer. I don't want to know the contents of the box because I want to do better. It seems like the same reasoning applies. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely more to say about that, but I had one more kind of two boxer argument, which is sort of like a companions in guilt. So the thought is that, like, look, one boxer reasoning or evidentialist reasoning recommends incorrectly in these other cases. So people might point to like the smoking lesion case or the psychopath button, or maybe others, and they'll say, well, the one boxer reasoning goes wrong there. The sort of all the motivation that would support one boxing in this case gets the wrong recommendation in these cases. That at least undermines the justification, the normal justification for one boxing Newcomb's problem. Suggests that the decision theory is incorrect, and so we shouldn't trust that result. What do you think about
sort of? I mean, I suppose the response would depend on exactly which case we're talking about, but generally speaking, my inclination is just to deny that the one boxer reasoning does go wrong. So, so the smoker lesion example, this is the thought is, well, it would be something like, there's a strong correlation between people who smoke and people who get lung cancer, but like, let's just suppose it's because there's a gene which makes you want to smoke, right, and that causes lung cancer. So it's not that smoking causes lung cancer, it's just that smoking is very strongly correlated to lung cancer. I think the problem is that when people think about this scenario, it's very tempting to think of it in terms of like the gene produces the disposition to desire to smoke. So obviously, I can say, well, if I've got that gene and I've got the disposition to smoke, it's not going to make any difference whether or not I stop smoking. But you really, like, if you're making the analogy to Newcomb's problem, it has to be that the gene would somehow like be causing you to make the decision, right? So it doesn't matter whether or not you're disposed to smoke. It doesn't matter whether or not you like smoking, right? It's literally just the decision to smoke, right? So I know that if I choose to smoke, I'm going to get lung cancer. If I don't choose to smoke, I'm not going to. And in that case, I would just not choose to smoke. That seems really easy to me. It's like, yeah, obviously I would not choose to smoke. You come up with like loads of examples like this. It's like, well, what if if I choose to turn the next page of this book, I'm like, it so happens to be the case that everybody who chooses to turn the next page of this book happens to have a gene which causes them to die at 30 of some terrible disease, whereas everybody else is fine. Like, would you choose to turn the next page of the book? I mean, of course not. Like, that seems obvious. So well, I say it seems obvious. Maybe it doesn't seem obvious to causal decision theorists, but it seems obvious to me.
Yeah, you brought up a very good point, though, which is that what are the details of this problem? Is it just that the lesion produces, or like it produces the desire or the sort of preference to smoke, and then and if you don't have it, then you don't develop that. Because if it works that way, in which case you can already know prior to the outcome of your decision that, oh, I have the desire to smoke, and so that's already a sign that I have the lesion. And people talk about how this kind of screens off, so to speak, the evidence of the outcome of the choice, because you already know, or could be pretty confident, whether you have the lesion and whether you will have the cancer given the presence of this desire or whatever. And another way this has been put is like tickle defenses and stuff like that. And I think that's fine, right? It might screen off that evidence. And then if you already know, given whether you have the desire or disposition prior to the choice, and that's what having the lesion predicts and so on, then you'll already know, or at least be pretty confident that you have the lesion or you don't, and so on. And whether you, in fact, end up smoking doesn't confer any additional evidence. And so in that case, it would be rational to smoke. However, as you were right to point out, that's not the same as what's going on in the Newcomb's problem. To make it properly analogous, it's not like whether the predictor predicted, that you would 1 box or 2 boxes, like produces some sign in you prior to your choice, and you can sort of conditionalize on that sign, which prediction was made and so on. And then the outcome of your choice doesn't confer any additional evidence. No, the outcome of the choice is conferring additional evidence in that case. And if you want to make them analogous, it's like in the lesion case, you're going to want to say something like, there's nothing prior to the outcome of the choice that I can sort of conditionalize on to know or be confident in whether I have the lesion in such a way that the choice I make has no additional evidential bearing on whether I have the lesion or the cancer. Right. So what we do want to say to make the cases analogous, I don't know if I said this right the first time, but we do want to say to make the case analogous, yeah, that there just is nothing of that sort that would, some prior sign of the action that would screen off the evidence conferred by the action taken. And in that case, yeah, I'm not going to smoke. I don't think people who smoke, given that same evidence I have and so on, they tend to have the cancer, and tend to die sooner. And I don't know, all the same reasoning applies. It seems to me like the right thing to do. And you can make the cases more extreme. You know, the person who smokes or the person who has the lesion also has this other disease that causes them to explode at 10 minutes after smoking. You know, like, I'm not smoking, right? You could say, well, oh, either I have the gene or I don't. And so, you know, either I'm going to end up exploding or I'm not. That's just this like weird fatalist reasoning I don't want to endorse. Like, I'm not going to smoke because I don't want to explode, you know, even if my smoking or not smoking doesn't cause me to explode or not explode.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I like what I see in all of these examples are sort of, you know, regularities that we can exploit for our own benefit, you know. So if it's the case that we're living in a weird world where somebody smokes and then they explode 10 minutes later, of course I'm not going to smoke. It doesn't matter whether or not, who cares about the causes, right? I don't want to explode, so I'm not going to smoke. And you know, I've seen this regularity, right? The people that smoke explode and the people that don't. So that seems, it seems like you're applying the same sort of one boxer reasoning, and that seems intuitively like the right conclusion to me. But I guess we come to this problem that two boxers are just going to disagree with this, right? So I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's more things you can say. Like, you can ask them, but I mean, don't you not want to explode? Like, you know, and so on. But yeah, actually, I do want to turn now to some of the arguments I had listed down in favor of one boxing. And really, this first one that I think is the most compelling to me. I think probably kind of hard for someone to deny. But anyway, we'll talk about the ways in which someone might deny it, which is that if one act does foreseeably worse than another act, it's like it does predictably worse, then the latter action, you know, the one that does foreseeably better, is rationally preferable to the former. Two boxing does foreseeably worse than one boxing, the Newcomb's problem. Hence, one boxing is rationally preferable to two boxing in Newcomb's problem. I mean, this just seems completely compelling to me. Like, what do you think about this sort of argument?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is pretty much why I'm a one boxer. You know, David Lewis had this response to the whole like "why ain't you rich" thing, and he's like, well, you know, sometimes irrational actions pay off, right? Like, somebody might play the lottery, that's not rational. Sometimes they win, and that's like fair enough. I take the point, but is it the case that rational actions like predictably pay off like over and over and over again, that you know, that we can sort of say, okay, there's this action which like everybody who does it does a lot better than doing this alternative action. It seems a lot less intuitive to me to say that is irrational. So yeah, I just think, I mean, I think I just agree with what you said. Like, the one boxers are walking away with 1 million. The two boxers are walking away with 1,000. I know that there's nothing different about me, right? Like, there's nothing special about me. We're assuming that the predictor is just as good at predicting my behavior as it is at predicting everyone else's. So I know that if I one box, I'm going to walk away with 1 million. That pretty much seals it for me.
Yeah, you know, and how Lewis says something like, yeah, when they, like the two boxers, made their choices, there were no millions to be had, right? So that's why they didn't get rich. And it's fine, you're right? But sometimes the quote unquote rational action, kind of leaving aside precisely what that means, is going to be one which you get unlucky, right? You do worse sometimes. You know, the person who takes the better bet sometimes loses. But to me, it seems incoherent to say that the rational action is one which like sort of predictably does worse, right? You can sort of predict ahead of time, and the prediction is like reasonable given the evidence you have and so on, that action will do worse, but nevertheless, that's the action you should do. That seems to me that's just to violate what I take rational choice to be concerned with. And you could say, oh, my idea of rational choice or, rational action, or whatever, is concerned with something other than, performing the action which is predictably the best. And you can say I care about getting the performing the action which has the greatest causal consequences or something like that. But then if that sort of commitment in some cases violates this commitment I have to performing the action that does like predictably the best, then I think therefore your decision theory goes wrong in those cases, because this is what I'm tying rational action to. And yeah, you could say I'm not tying it to that, and so we can just there's no, like, in a way the dispute isn't really substantive. Someone's saying I'm caring about this and someone's saying I care about this. But if you're not caring about doing the action that's predictably the best, then okay, fine, you do you, but I want to get the best result predictably, right?
It always strikes me as being like some weird kind of rule worship or like principle worship, where it's like, well, yeah, okay, I mean, I agree on what the causal facts are, but like, why are you using that as a constraint on your action? But then, this kind of comes back to this point I was saying earlier, where it's like, I'm not sure that I can identify where exactly the two-boxer is making a mistake, because at the end of the day, if they are indeed engaged in what I see as a weird kind of principle worship, okay, fine, maybe we just have a completely different understanding of what rational action is, as you suggest. I mean, it's bizarre to me, but yeah, I mean, like, yeah, so maybe it's just a kind of fundamental sort of bedrock disagreement, and I don't know what more to say.
At the bottom level, people might care about different things, but I'm going to say that the person who is two boxing and like consistent with some decision theory that endorses that and so on, they have to not in all cases be caring about performing the action that does predictably the best, or they want to say sometimes what they should be doing, what's rational for them to be doing, quote unquote, does predictably worse than another action. Okay, that can be your commitment. That's not what I care about. I want to do it predictably the best. And so their commitment is just like completely alien to me. It's just kind of like crazy. But as you say here and earlier, it's possible for people to have commitments or preferences which are to me crazy. And I guess I can't call them quote unquote irrational for following those commitments. But I mean, it's still crazy. I mean, like, I don't know.
This is a bit of a tangent, but I'm just curious because you asked me like right at the beginning what my thoughts were on why so many philosophers endorse two boxing, and I was just curious if you had like a hypothesis for that. I mean, like, do you have any thought on like why it is there are so many two boxers?
Yeah, I guess it's probably just that certain two boxer arguments became popular in the literature, and there really aren't that many people defending the alternatives. Like, for example, if Arif Ahmed wasn't publishing in favor of one boxing, I think the difference would be much more extreme than it is. Who else is writing now in favor of one boxing? It's like there's very few. Of course, it's not a huge literature anyway, but if you look at it, it's like, I mean, yeah, it's probably that the people were convinced by the sort of arguments that are in favor of two boxing. Maybe a lot of people that got into that field had that sort of intuition. I was thinking about this earlier, actually, because like people who work in philosophy of action and so forth and decision theory might have related intuitions about how I don't know, freedom works, how so people have this sort of branching view of the garden of forking paths view of like how time and choice progresses, and those sort of intuitions might lead to sort of fixity principles about the past and might lead to certain kind of factual reasoning. Additionally, yeah, I mean, people that have been very influential regarding assessing counterfactuals, like Lewis and Stalnaker, and other people have had a huge sway in how those things are assessed in these problems, even if people don't necessarily endorse their way of assessing counterfactuals exactly. I don't know, it's probably a variety of things. It's hard to say. I don't know.
Yeah. It's quite a nice idea that that the reason why there are so many two boxes is because they're convinced by the arguments. I mean, that's a nice picture of philosophy.
Yeah,
see,
it's kind of
I
an
suppose,
idealized utopian
right,
view that people are just have the positions they have because they were convinced by the arguments.
right.
But
I suppose I'd always sort of thought, well, you know, it's probably just that people just fundamentally have different intuitions. Like the initial reaction drives the sort of arguments that people end up accepting.
I guess
maybe
you might
I'm
think.
wrong.
I mean, you might think
Too
that the difference in philosophers in the field is kind of similar to the difference among, say, like general population or lay people or whatever, and or even just philosophers on the whole. And you know, the people who had their initial intuition of two boxing, kind of that's where they went in their writing. They kind of started endorsing those arguments. I mean, yeah, it's probably true that initial intuitions play a large role. I wonder, there might be other things that make a difference for those particular populations, and maybe for some of them the arguments made a difference. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, so I'll just go to another couple one boxer arguments. So the one that is kind of just most commonly stated is in terms of expected value. This knows essentially makes this argument in the original paper, and others have echoed it. It's just that, yeah, the expected return of taking one box is a million or nearly a million, and the expected return of taking both boxes is a little over 1,000 or 1,000. Million is much more than 1,000, so one boxing is rationally preferable. We should perform the action which has a higher expected return. That seems to me, this might be sort of related to the above argument. We want to do the action which is predictably better, but this was done. This was at least how it's sometimes been put anyway. Seems right to me. I mean, how do you think people are going to respond to this, or how do you?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's. I'm not sure I have anything necessarily new to say about it. You know, based on what we've said before. You know, like obviously the two boxer is going to agree with the like assignment of the probabilities and everything, but you know, they would just say, well, you know, two boxing dominates, you're leaving money on the table, etc. And in any case, I mean, when I made the decision, the money wasn't there, it wasn't to be had, etc. So yeah, I think that they would have the same sort of, you know, just responses we've been over, really.
Yeah, I might say, like, look, I agree that with those probabilities and so forth, but we're going to disagree on how we're calculating expected utility. I'm calculating this sort of like causal expected utility, or I have some other expected utility formula that doesn't map onto, in this way, those like probability statements that you were making. And the causal expected utility of taking both exceeds by 1,000 the causal expected utility of taking only one.
Right.
And well, I want to maximize causal expected utility and take both. And yeah, but it seems to me that the sort of reasoning that the evidentialist is going through, they're just thinking about what's the likely return? What am I going to likely have if I do this, and what am I likely going to have if I do that? Okay, taking one box is more likely to gain me more money than taking 2 boxes, so I'm going to do that. Like, why do I? What's the motivation for bringing in these other factors like causation in assessing the sort of expected utility of an outcome? Seems to me unmotivated.
Mm-hmm.
And if it contradicts the like straightforward expected utility, I'm going to prefer that. I just don't know. Like, you have some other decision problem which says, oh, calculating utility in this way, taking both boxes gives us higher expected utility with respect to that formula. Why would I care about that formula? I care about having the most money. And it seems like the way I'm approaching this, just with the probabilities and the evidence, that's gets it right. That's the one it recommends is the one that gets me the most money, and so on.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
and predictably so. Yeah. So we've kind of already talked about it, but another common one-boxer argument is the why ain't you rich argument. It's the basic thought is just one boxers tend to become rich when they face Newcomb's problem. 2 boxers tend to not become rich, relatively speaking. And the best explanation for this difference is that, one boxers were doing the right action. They're doing what's rational for them to do, something like that. And as you pointed out, yeah, David Lewis and other people would endorse Lewis's response here, is to say that irrationality was rewarded. When the 2 boxes made their choices, there were no millions to be had. The reason, he says, the reason why we are not rich is that the riches were reserved for the irrational. The riches were reserved for the irrational. And I could know ahead of time that the riches would be so reserved for the quote unquote irrational. So why?
Yeah. Think,
right?
well,
So
maybe I should just be irrational.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, but it's you could. That's one way to put it, kind of, But the other thing is to say, it seems, again, going back to how I'm thinking about rationality, it's not even coherent to say,
right? Yeah,
that the riches are kind of predictably reserved for the irrational.
When I should say I'm sort of being a bit tongue in cheek when I say, like, you should be irrational, but it's I mean, there's a serious point, which is, well, look, if your theory of rationality entails that I'm going to predictably be taking the option that makes me worse off, then like why would I care about that? I mean, why would I have any motivation to follow that rule? I mean, I'm going to follow the rules that make me better off, predictably, right? Which we all agree that one boxing makes me predictably better off. So I don't, like, why would I care if that's if that's irrational, right? Like, so yeah, it's odd. I also, when he says, like, there were no millions to be had, I mean, again, that would bring us back to how we evaluate the counterfactuals. So I guess we sort of, again, would kind of have the disagreement there.
Right, because he wants to say that there were no millions to be had. Like, no matter what choice I made, I would have received either a 0 or 1,000. But one of those is going to be counter to fact, and you're going to have to assess that counterfactual. And he wants to hold it fixed that there was nothing in the opaque box. But yeah, we're going to come back to the counterfactual thing. And this sentence just seems like crazy to me. The riches were reserved for the irrational. Okay, you can call them irrational, but if I know that there's some class of people that I know ahead of time riches are being reserved for, I'm going to try to be in that class of people, right? I want the riches reserved for me. So call me irrational if you want. That's what I'm doing.
Well, I think it's a question of whether or not there is some sort of effective strategy for getting yourself into that class. And in some cases there isn't, right? Like we know that the riches are going to be reserved for whoever happens to get the right numbers when they win the lottery. I mean, okay, but I have no way of knowing what those numbers are. But in the case of Newcomb's problem, it's really easy. You just take one box. That's how you get into the class of the rich people.
Right. Or at least the people that you expect to get rich, right?
Right.
Like I agree, right? In the case of the lottery and so forth, there are people that are going to get rich, and you can know, the people who got the numbers right, they're the ones that are going to get rich. But there's nothing I can do sort of reliably ahead of time so as to, satisfy that condition. But in this case, you're right. Yeah, there is something I can do in my choice to satisfy the condition, given which I'm likely to get rich. It's taking one box. So
you sort of wonder, like, okay, what's the sort of, okay, I get it, right? Some people are going to just have this kind of weird rule worship or principle worship where they're like, no, I'm following causal decision theory. But it's like, what exactly is it that's like making you accept this theory if it's not the fact that, it gets you what you want? I mean, and if you care about getting what you want, earlier I was being a bit conciliatory to two boxes, but now I'm in a less conciliatory mood. It's because, I don't know, we're moving from 1 hour to the other. So, but now I'm just like, why the hell would anybody take this seriously? I can't, like, once you're granting that this theory, right, isn't going to be making you rich, and there's some other rule you could follow that would make you rich. Once you grant that, why wouldn't you just follow that other rule?
Right.
I don't get it.
Yeah. So we can ask, like, what are the sort of most basic considerations here, right? Is it that you prefer this, causal decision theory formulas and like want to maximize that, or is there something else that you care about, that you think this is like an appropriate model for, right? And if you just care about the rule, okay, it's like, I mean, I don't really care about rules on that level, right? I especially don't care about your causal decision theory rule. Now, if we look at the things that I do care about, and if it were the case that, the causal decision theory rule was a good model for that, it kind of helped me maximize the things that I care about or whatever, then okay, then that might be a good tool to use in decision problems. But I don't think it is, because on the contrary, I think the evidentialist approach is going to appropriately model or give me the correct recommendation for the things that I care about, because the things I care about are predictably getting the most money, for example. And that's something that evidential decision theory is going to recommend correctly on, and causal decision theory is going to recommend incorrectly on. And if the causalist says, oh no, it's not that I care about the causal decision principle per se, but I care about something else that it's, that's a good model for. Okay, what is it that you care about? It must conflict with what I care about, predictably doing the best, whatever. So, we're just going to be at an impasse there, and I'm going to think that they're just kind of, if you don't care about getting the most that you can or something like that, okay, we have different basic preferences. I guess I don't understand yours. To me, it's like saying, I care about getting the least amount of money. That's what I want to do. Okay, you can do that. That seems to be on a par. See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I guess a lot can be said about those, but and especially about this, like, how do we find the sort of the most basic commitments, and is there a way to make the dispute substantive and so on? But might turn out to be not substantive, in the sense that people care about different things and are calling those things rational or irrational. But I'm sorry, if you're not caring about performing the action that you can expect reasonably to do the best, to get the most money or whatever. You just talking about something else than what I'm talking about. And that's fine. It might be just people are talking past each other. But that's where the conversation ends for me, I guess. Maybe I could try to pump the intuitions that people probably do care about this, but it may be that they don't.
Well, yeah, you see, that's what's odd, because it seems like the justification for adopting causal decision theory in the first place is, well, it so happens that in the real world, when we want something and then we see what we need to do, what causes that thing to occur, you do what causes the thing to occur. Generally speaking, it makes sense to use like causality as a constraint on rational action. So, okay, but it presumably, like, the reason why we're adopting that is because we've seen that there are certain regularities where what we desire, right, is like the best means for getting what we desire is by performing particular types of action. But then if you imagine a case where, say, the causal facts come apart from expected utility or whatever, then it seems weird to just insist on keeping the causality as a constraint when you're recognizing that it doesn't predictably give you what you want.
Yeah, you might think that there's a sort of hasty inference that is being made there, right? From the fact that, doing the action which causally promotes what you desire, generally, if not, in fact, all the cases we tend to face, gets the right outcome, gets you what you desire, or at least most likely to get you what you desire. There's sort of the inference from that observation to, therefore, in all possible cases you could face, doing what sort of causally promotes what you desire is going to get the right result. That's where we can tie rationality to performing the action which best causally promotes the preferred outcome. And I think that inference is wrong. I think even though it's true in most cases that we in fact face, doing what causally promotes your desire, leaving aside potentially controversial issues about what causation is, that's going to result in, or at least most likely to result in, the preferred outcome. There are other cases you can face which are not like that. Sometimes the action which causally, does the best that it quote unquote causally can or something, is not to do the action that is the best, is most the action that results in the most preferred outcome, where result there is not necessarily causal. So and these cases, like Newcomb cases, I think there's others, but even some that might be a bit more mundane, but there are other cases where it doesn't get the desired outcome as best as some other action. And if ultimately what we care about is, having the desired result, I mean, that's almost definitional, then the fact that this causal decision procedure gets it right most of the time, the inference from that to the fact that it gets it right all the time is wrong, because we have these counterexamples. And the thing that we're going to be more hesitant to give up is the preference to get, that we perform the action which particularly gets what we want, not the endorsement of a particular decision rule, apart from that, I guess. And so that's why I think, because causal decision theory goes wrong in these cases with respect to this aim, right, getting particularly the best result or whatever, we should dismiss it. I mean, it might be a good heuristic in most cases, but it goes wrong in these. And that's why I think, yeah, anyway, I'm just kind of repeating myself. Anyway. Yeah, I did want to talk about we mentioned the perfect predictor case earlier, but I think a sort of argument can be made based on that. All right, so in the variant of Newcomb's problem where the predictor is perfect, it's 100% reliable. You could even suppose it's essentially 100% reliable, but it's, well, I don't want to, anyway. And in that case, just one boxing is obviously uniquely rational. You clearly one box in the perfect predictor case. There are some dissenters, but we can talk about that. Now, however, there's no relevant difference between the 100% reliable case and the 99.999, a Google 9 case, if you want, or even the 99% case, whatever. And if there's no sort of decision theoretically relevant difference between those two cases, then yeah, in the 99% case, one boxing is also uniquely rational. What do you think about this as a sort of argument for one boxing?
I mean, I find it pretty persuasive. But as you pointed out, there are dissenters to this. So, I mean, I'm not exactly sure how rhetorically effective it is. So it's just like, look, if you have a perfect predictor, then there are only two scenarios by definition, right? Like you one box and get 1 million, or you two box and get 1,000, right? That's it. And I mean, like, and in fact, if you go in there with the intention of one boxing, then you absolutely know when you take that one box that you're getting 1 million. There's just no question about it. Those are the only two options. So that seems to, I mean, like, on the one hand, it's like, well, there's no probabilities anymore. That seems to simplify it. But then on the other hand, you think, well, if the predictor is, like, so reliable in the initial case that you can pretty much act as if it was certain. I mean, and it is. It's like defined to be 99.9% reliable. So what's the relevant difference? There doesn't seem to be a difference, and it seems really weird that you would say, you're gonna one box. So like if the predictor is 70% reliable, you two box, 75% you two box, 99% you two box, 99.99% you two box. But the minute you go over that threshold to 100%, then you one box. What would be the motivation for that? That seems really weird. So I find that point compelling. But the problem is like, I mean, I presented this to people, and I've read articles where people have talked about this, and they've just been like, yeah, in the perfect predictor case, you two box. The same considerations apply. Two boxing dominates one boxing, and like if you've got £1,000 on the table in front of you, you should take the £1,000. I mean, I find that really weird, but I find two boxing in the initial case really weird as well. So
yeah. So the way I thought about this is like there's like three basic responses that someone could have to this sort of argument. One is to say, well, the 100% reliable case is like not possible or not a legitimate decision problem or something like that. In fact, I forgot who it was, but someone said in print that, a perfect predictor like that's not even possible. Well, I mean, I want to say it is possible, but second, even if it isn't, it's possible that someone believe it, and so you could still generate that decision problem. But whatever, because you don't actually, in fact, have to. I want to say that you can face Newcomb's problem from like as a brain in a vat, for example. All that matters to face the problem is the sort of credences and preferences you have. And so if you happen to believe something impossible, then maybe you can still make a recommendation. It might turn out that it makes the sort of problem incoherent. And in that case, you couldn't coherently generate a recommendation, but whatever. But we kind of went over and over this. It seems perfectly fine to me, just as it might be that determinism is true and you can face a decision problem. This seems entirely the same. Something could be perfectly predicting your actions. I don't see why that would make it not a decision problem. You still have epistemically speaking, multiple options open to you, or for which you can deliberate, weigh your evidence, preferences, and so on, seems to be enough for it to be a decision problem. Anyway, but that more can be said about that. But I think we're on the same page there. Another sort of response someone could have to the argument is to say, "Oh no, just bite the bullet in a way and say, no, I'd also two box in the 100% reliable case, or at the very least, you should two box even if they end up one boxing." And this, I don't know, because and it may turn out again that they just care about following these two box or arguments or decision rules, and well, it equally applies here. Though some of the arguments you can't run, because you can't run, say, a dominance argument, because there's only two outcomes possible, not four. But some of the other arguments you could still run, certain arguments relating to causation and so forth. So they could end up biting the bullet and say, yeah, I'll take both boxes even then, or at least I should take both boxes. I don't. What are we going to say aside from saying, look, there's only two possible outcomes here. You take one and you get a million, you take two, both you get 1,000. I mean, you prefer the first. It's like, you could think of it as like a menu of options, and you're just choosing the one that you less prefer. Like, why would you do that? Like, that just seems inconsistent with your desires. And they could say, oh no, but I prefer following the rules of causal decision theory or whatever. Okay. You know what I mean? You see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
I mean, we're kind of covering the same ground again, but
yeah, I think I agree. I mean, like, it's I really don't see in this particular, with this case, it I mean, but then I don't really see the appeal of two boxing in the standard case either. But
in the case where it's like perfect,
you've only got you've only got two options on the table here, and it's like I guess you can insist on sort of like you can insist on kind of describing the sort of possibilities generated by what's in the boxes at the time you make the decision. You can sort of say, well, even if I'm determined to take, like if I take one box, I get, the million, and if I take two boxes, I get 1,000. Even if that's fixed, it's still the case that, there's like an extra 1,000 there, right? Were you to one box. But I mean, I don't know, there comes a point where it's like that just seems to be failing to engage with the scenario as it's described. So it's like if you were to try the counterfactual claim, like, oh well, if I'd one boxed, I would have got nothing. Then I'm just going to say, yeah, but you're just not engaging with the scenario. Like you've just changed the scenario there. So I don't know. It's very difficult to see what can be said for the two boxer in this case.
Yeah, and the third response to this sort of perfect predictor case is to endorse a sort of discontinuous strategy. Yeah, anything less than perfect reliability, take both, and at perfect reliability, take only one. And there's been a few causalists who will say things like this. And well, I mean, this isn't necessarily a decisive argument, but it does seem like this is sort of unexplained discontinuity in rational choice. Like, okay, holding all the other details of the problem fixed, if it's 100% reliable, rational action is to take option A. And if it's, 99.800 trillion nines liable to take, then the rational action is take option B. Is like, it's like the same problem. It's just like that difference is just so inconsequential to what's likely going to occur. That's like, that would make it just it just changes what the rational action is completely. It's like, I mean, it's possible that a tiny variation in some of the details of a decision problem can make a difference to what's rational. It's just any any non-zero difference here is going to make that huge of a difference. Seems unexplained to me. And also, there are Arif Ahmed has this paper where he gives a sort of other argument against this sort of discontinuous strategy. The paper is called Infallibility in the Newcomb problem from 2015, where, well, I don't need to bring it up here, but he gives us sort of another case where you kind of have two perfect quote unquote predictors, such that the motivation for the discontinuous strategy would actually motivate one boxing in that case. But actually that case is sort of functionally equivalent to the original Newcomb problem. Anyway, it's just an additional problem that I'm not really going to explain fully here for taking this discontinuous strategy. Aside from this, just maybe it's just it's kind of a blank stare, or just like unbelievability that this tiny difference in reliability would make such a huge difference with respect to rational action. But there's at least those two problems with it, I think.
If you take the discontinuous strategy, if the two-boxer takes the discontinuous strategy, doesn't that, I mean, so like, isn't that going to undermine the justification for causal decision theory? Because surely causal decision theory is going to issue the same, like, it doesn't matter whether the predictor is 100% reliable, right? I mean, that can't make a difference to that. So if you're granting the discontinuous strategy, it looks like you've undercut at least the argument from causal decision theory for two boxing in the standard Newcomb case.
It's going to undermine some of the arguments, and it's going to be inconsistent. And some of the, because we tend to talk about causal decision theory as if it's like one decision theory, but really it's not. I mean, there's different formulations, and even now, like there was a paper out last year from somebody, I forget, I think maybe it was Williamson and someone else, I don't know, like offering a different variation on it. And you know what, whether a particular version of causal decision theory endorses two boxing or one boxing in the perfect predictor case, we have to look at that version. It is true that some of the arguments that have been given for taking both boxes are going to apply as well in the perfect predictor case. And I mean, I think the fact that the perfect predictor case is, you know, one in which you definitely should not two box is going to be a defeater for those arguments, and for any decision theory which recommends taking both boxes in that case. But that still leaves other causalist-like theories on the table that might be consistent with that. Especially like maybe those that assess rationality with assess the utility with these sort of causal counterfactuals. Well, they might say, oh, in the perfect predictor case, then it becomes backtracking or something, and then in that case you should assess it in this way, and one boxing is rational.
Right.
I don't know. There's different models, but I think whose was it? I think Stalnaker's, for example, would endorse. No. Someone had this. Maybe it's not Stalnaker, but there was someone. Maybe it was him. I forget. There was one theory according to which you just looking at states causally independent and holding those fixed and evaluating expected utility with those, and that sort of decision theory would entail taking both boxes is rational in the perfect predictor case. And there's other ones that might say the same thing, but yeah, I do think the perfect predictor case does undermine at least some of the two boxing arguments, and the problems that the discontinuous strategy faces for the others still, to me, remains a problem. One, for the reason I mentioned, that's like there doesn't seem to be any relevant difference here rationally speaking, and second, there's some like concrete problems that like Ahmed raises for discontinuous strategies. Yeah, that's what I would say on that anyway. So yeah, I had a couple more like one boxer arguments, and then we can wrap up. I just realized we've been going for quite a while now. Might be getting late there.
That's cool. I don't mind. It has, hasn't it? It's I think nearly 3 hours, which is I quite like the idea of talking about opening boxes for that length of time. This can nobody's going to do a longer video on Newcomb's problem than this.
That'd be that's very unlikely. Thanks for doing it though. Thanks for sticking around. So another. This is not something that has been made explicitly in the literature, I don't, as an argument in the literature, but it's like I took this from this other paper by David Volpert, I'm not sure, and Gregory Benford. It was from 2013. It's called The Lesson of Newcomb's Paradox. Anyway, the idea is something like this. The order of the prediction and the choice doesn't really make a difference to most of the motivations for one boxing or two boxing. For example, if the prediction or retrodiction, if you prefer, is made sort of after you've locked in your choice, but it's not caused by it, right? So we're not keep the causal structure the same, more or less. Then presumably the causalist is going to say they should still take both boxes. All we've changed is like the time at which the prediction is made, not whether it's caused, by the choice. And the same sort of reasoning applies. You should causal dominance, whatever else, take both boxes. But in the case where the prediction is, it's like you're in the room, the prediction has not yet been made. So you kind of lock in your choice to pick both boxes, say, and then that just happens to correlate with subsequent retrodiction that you would take both boxes. I don't know. It seems less forceful, maybe the intuition in favor of taking both boxes in that case. I mean, what do you think about this variation where the prediction is made subsequent?
Just to clarify how this scenario works, I choose a box, I choose one box, and I presumably don't open it at this point.
Right.
And then that locks in my choice. Then later, the retrodictor gives their retrodiction. And then if they retrodict that I one boxed, they would give me the money.
Yep.
The million. If they retrodict two boxes, I would only get the 1,000, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
I mean,
but again,
I agree.
The retrodiction is not causally dependent on your choice you make again. Yeah.
I mean, I would definitely one box in that case, but I'm just not sure how that's a stronger case for one boxing than the initial Newcomb's problem. Maybe I'm missing something. I don't know. I might just not be getting it, but it's just okay, why shouldn't the two boxer just say the same thing here as they? I mean, presumably they would be committed to saying the same thing here, but I'm not sure why they would view it as counterintuitive.
Well, one thing that they can't say in this case is oh, the contents of the box is already fixed or something like that. It's the choice has already been made, the past is fixed, and
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, of
course. That's the difference. Okay, sorry that I'm slow. I guess it's because we've been talking for ages. But yeah, of course. The right. Okay, now I see it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but plausibly, their decision theory is still going to be recommending taking both boxes because you can't cause them to predict or retrodict that you take both or whatever, or take one. But then how are you evaluating? And then also, how are you evaluating the counterfactuals? Are you going to hold fixed the retrodiction that's made in the future? And that just seems crazy. To me, it doesn't seem any more crazy than holding fixed the prediction that's made in the past. But I can at least understand a bit of the intuition behind that. I mean, yeah, I don't think this is, maybe it's not the most compelling sort of, but I think it's at least a bit of an intuition pump that, I mean, in this case, where it's a retrodiction, I guess some of the motivation you might have for taking both boxes seems to disappear, but nevertheless, it's like structurally it's kind of the same. It's like, it's not, the causal structure is the same. It's just the temporal ordering of things has changed, but everything else is kind of the same. And so this maybe at least some reason to think that you should, what's rational in one is rational in the other, but there's at least maybe more of an intuition in favor of one boxing in the case where it's a retrodiction. Anyway, that might, if not a formal argument, there's maybe at least some sort of intuition pump there.
I get it, because we lose the point that the past is fixed.
Right.
So yeah, that's a puzzling case. I feel like I want to give this to, I want to think about this case like as a two boxer would. Like what part of this do they find, counterintuitive? But I don't know. I'm not inside their heads. I'll have to give it to some two boxers and see what they say.
Right.
I guess.
Because I had also thought about like, really, let's think about three cases, or at least think about two cases first, right? Think about the forward-looking. There's a retrodiction, but suppose it's caused, right, by the choice you make. Everyone's going to agree there that you take only one box, right? Because you're kind of causing them to make that prediction. And I want to think about, let's fill in the story, right? Suppose that there's a little camera in the room as you're kind of locking in your choice, and the predictor is in another room. There's some delay, say it's a few minutes, whatever, maybe even a few seconds, doesn't matter, between you're locking in your choice and the camera displaying, on a screen that they can see what you do, and then they by what they see, they make their retrodiction. Suppose like occasionally they press the wrong button by accident to make them not perfect, or whatever. And yeah, in that case, everyone agrees take one box so that they'll see that you take one box and make the corresponding retrodiction. Now, let's think about the following case that's like just like that, but except that, the camera's not on. It's like the causal chain is broken. It's just that they still have a screen and they can still see more or less what you're doing. It's just that this like crazy coincidence or something non-causal that what they appears on their screen closely matches what you're doing in the room. It's not causing it. What you're doing in the room isn't causing the thing that on their screen, right? The camera's off. There's no signal being transmitted. Whatever else you think might be sufficient for your action causing that outcome, but it's still correlated with it. What you do, what sort of decision you lock in the room, correlates with what they see on the screen. They can kind of see you more or less locking in your choice. I think it's weird to say that whether there's in these cases, whether taking one box or both boxes is rational depends on whether that causal chain is broken or not. As if like this is what's making a difference. Do you kind of get what I'm saying here? Like the thought is that if in the case where the causal chain is not broken, it makes sense to one box. But like, the camera's off, but everything else is kind of the same. They're still seeing you on the screen. In that case, two boxing is rational. It seems to me like we should give the same analysis of the cases.
I suppose we could imagine a case where the predictor is getting, or rather the retrodictor is getting the images of like a duplicate universe or something like that, or like twin Earth or something. So it's not caused by what you're doing, but there's this perfect correlation or something like that. So it would be weird for that to make a difference. Yeah.
At least it's another sort of intuition pump, but you could formulate it into an argument too. And actually, that perfect duplicate thing brings me to my sort of the last argument that I've written down. Again, it's more of an intuition, but the thought is that, yeah, we agree that we're not taking one box so as to cause there to have been $1 million in the opaque box. We're supposing that it doesn't do that. But we can take one box so as to ensure, or near enough, that there was $1 million in the opaque box. So it's not like causation per se. We're granting it isn't causation, but it's like causation in the relevant respect, in that we're acting so as to ensure or near enough a particular outcome. And that seems to me good enough, for deciding rational action. It's like sort of, you could call it quasi-causation if you want. And this is a point drawn from a paper that I really like by John Leslie called Insuring 2 Bird Deaths with 1 Stone, or something like that. And the thought is like, okay, suppose the universe was duplicated or like split down the middle so that like what happens in one region is mirrored exactly in the other, right? So whatever you do, there's a duplicate of you, some counterpart doing the same thing mirrored on the other side. But we also suppose that what's going on in these two sort of pocket universes are causally disconnected. Nothing I do over here is like causing what happens over there. It's kind of a weird hypothetical, but it's like coherent, it seems to me. And suppose you also, you wanted, for some reason you had this desire to kill 2 birds. You wanted 2 birds to die, right? You just wanted 2 birds to die. That's what you want. And suppose you have 1 rock and you're like, and you're only able to kill 1 bird with a rock. What are you going to think in this case? Are you going to say, well, I can only kill 1 bird. What I really care about is having 2 birds dead. I don't really care about whether only 1 dies. So I guess I'll give up. Like, nothing I can do. I can't kill 2 birds. Or are you going to say, wait a minute, but if I kill a bird with this rock, my counterpart in the other side is going to kill a bird. And so 2 birds will be dead. And that's what I wanted, right? And the point is, you might as well act so as to produce, so that desired outcome obtains, even if it's not entirely caused by the action that you do. You're acting so as to ensure a particular outcome, be it birds dying or millions predicted, even if your action isn't causing that entirely. And I think, just as in the case of the bird case, how it can be rational to perform that action, even though the outcome isn't entirely caused by what you're doing. I think it's just the same in the Newcomb case. Yeah, the outcome isn't entirely caused by what you choose to do, but nevertheless, you can act so as to ensure the preferred outcome or near enough. That's one way to put it, I think. What do you think about this?
This kind of reminds me of an argument that David Lewis uses in defense of modal realism, because there's this like kind of ethical objection that some people have to modal realism, where it's like, well, if you think that all possible worlds exist, then nothing you do really matters, because
in some other world there's going to be someone doing the good or the bad.
And there's just like overall, you're never kind of increasing or decreasing net utility, because it's just like everything that could be the case is the case, right? So but I mean, he just says, well, look, what happens in these other possible worlds is irrelevant, right? Like, so I can kind of see Lewis being like, in the scenario you describe, I mean, what we care about is what happens in this world. I mean, I suppose it's possible to imagine somebody who just like in the abstract desires that 2 birds die. And then I guess if you did have that, then yeah, it would be fine, wouldn't it? Right. So I suppose with Lewis's response, it's just that tells us something about his psychology, right? Like, he doesn't care about what happens in these other worlds, but you could care. And in that case, the causality wouldn't matter. So I guess that was a rather long-winded way of saying that I basically agree with you, and that was something that reminded me of it.
No, that's a good connection. But note that I would add, though, that the fact that we're thinking about it as another world or another universe, it's not really essential, right? The essential feature is that there's something else going on that's sort of causally disconnected from what you're doing. Right, that's something satisfied in the Newcomb problem, as well as in the bird case. And sometimes if you care about the outcome of something that's causally disconnected from what you're doing, sometimes knowing that there's a strong correlation between what you do and what that other outcome is going to be sufficient to motivate you to act accordingly, right? I would prefer that my counterpart, throw a rock. I know that I'm not going to cause them to do it, but my doing it will ensure it, or my doing something else will ensure it, whatever.
Yeah.
Might as well do it. I can't cause the predictor to predict me and just take one box, but I can act so as to ensure or near enough that they did. Might as well do it. That's a preferred outcome.
Yeah. I think, it might be worth noting, and I kind of hinted at this before, like I'm just kind of going along with the standard story, right? When we talk about causality in these cases, but that in itself isn't obvious. Like when we say that you can't cause the predictor to put the money in the box,
right.
I'm not inclined to just say, okay, we can just take that for granted, because look, there are lots of different accounts of causality available. There are some accounts that are like more anti-realist. There's a really nice article by Hugh Price and somebody else whose name I've forgotten, but it's called Clickbait for Causalists.
Yes.
And they make this point that, like, look, the two-boxer is kind of assuming this like objectivist view of causation, where it's the causal connection between A and B that makes it rational to do A to achieve B. But there are alternative approaches where we might say that the fact that it's rational to do A to achieve B kind of grounds the fact that A causes B, or is somehow partly constitutive of the fact that A causes B. And if you adopt these more like subjectivist or anti-realist approaches, then it looks like you basically just you reconcile evidential decision theory with causal decision theory. They'd give you the same results. So I mean, it might be worth just like noting that, since we're sort of talking about this idea of quasi-causation. But yeah, I guess it's like, look, what is it that really matters to us? I mean, if you're going to take an objectivist line on causation, then I would say, well, in the real world, it so happens that it's the causal connections that matter. But we can easily come up with examples where it's like quasi-causality is what matters.
Right.
So just to give another sort of example like this, this is from Michael Dummett. He has an article called Bringing About the Past.
Yeah, I like that article.
I guess, yeah. It's sort of, so he has this example. Actually, I don't know if it's in that article. It might be in another one. But anyway, he says, well, imagine that I find that every time I get an envelope, if I say click before opening it, it does not contain a bill, right? Like, and
well, that's the Hugh Price one, right?
Yeah. Well, this
might be from
Dummett's example.
Maybe
but
right.
Yeah, it's originally from Dummett. So it's like, well, do we want to say that saying click causes the envelope not to have a bill? Maybe not. But look, we've identified a regularity here, and surely, if you don't want to get a bill, you'll say click, because saying click is a sufficient condition for the envelope not containing a bill. So,
right.
If you lived in a world like that, how would you act? Well, obviously you'd say click, so as to ensure you don't get any bills. That seems convincing to me.
Yeah, I agree. And it's kind of especially a problem if, like, as you mentioned, like, what if you don't think there is causation? What if you're sort of anti-realist about causation? Or what if you have this sort of Humean view? Or what if you think it's kind of just a matter of some convention that we have to call things causes and effects? And there's no more general metaphysical causal structure, or whatever that would mean exactly. Why would that? What is the causalist going to say to the anti-realist about causation? Certainly the anti-realist about causation isn't going to say, I care about maximizing the causal consequences of my action. I don't think there are causal consequences of my action. I think there are correlations maybe between actions and certain other states, but then they're just going to be evidential. How would they not be an evidentialist at that point? And it is, aside from that, I guess it is kind of weird to think that the the right theory of rational choice requires a particular theory of causation, and that causation, so understood as like this like integral feature to determining rational choice. I don't know. I mean, we might just end up rehashing some of the other things, but it is a problem that I don't think has been really considered enough. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose you could just sort of say, well, like, look, just imagine, for the sake of argument, that that the sort of causal anti-realist is right, that we actually live in a world in which, that there's not kind of metaphysically robust causal connections, or that we project causality or something else, or like, right. Causality is constituted by, rationality, something like that. I mean, what do we say here? I mean, are we going to say that like we just can't engage in rational action anymore? That seems pretty implausible. I mean, so I don't know, maybe that's a problem for everyone, because I guess you can always say, well, like whatever your theory of rational action is, you can always say, oh, well, imagine a world in which this fails. But I suppose
what are you going to say to the evidentialist, though? What is it that's
I guess this is what I was kind of getting at with the evidentialist. Like you'd sort of just have to imagine a world where there are like no regularities. So with the causal decision theorists, you can imagine a world where there are regularities, but there are not metaphysically robust causal connections. And then it looks like evidential decision theory works perfectly well in that world. But with the evidential decision theorist, you have to go a lot further, right? But that would only fail in a world where like there's just, it's just chaos.
Right.
The minute you've got like regularities that people can exploit in order to achieve what they want, then evidential decision theory comes in, and you can apply it to get what you want. So there does seem to be a difference there.
Yeah, they're going to have to end up saying something like, in the case where, in the world where there is no causation, say, then there are really no genuine decision problems, or at least there's no problems on which causal decision theory makes a recommendation. And so, you could imagine being in that world, or being someone who thinks to be so of the actual world that there's no causation, and thinking, well, what do I do? Like, like you're still deliberating over your action, and you can't look to causal decision theory because it's silent on this matter. You might, but plausibly you don't want something that's going to be silent here. It seems like you could still deliberate, even if, you to reject that, there's any causal structure. That's at least a problem, not necessarily a sort of like a refuting problem or something like that. I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but it's at least a problem for causal decision theory. It's a limitation of it. Yeah, I don't know. We could probably ramble on about that. I do think, though, that it's a fair point to make that often when people in the literature talk about causal decision theory, or decision theory more generally, they just kind of take for granted some notion of causation, even if it's left vague, and continue their theorizing with that. But probably worth figuring out what causation is, and maybe that would have some relevance and why we care about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, I do find that puzzling. Like, I mean, I feel like you might know more of this literature than I do. But I mean, my impression is that it's not a point that's really addressed that much. I don't know. Maybe it is. I could be wrong, but it's, and maybe that's okay. I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, I suppose like you do sort of have to just take some things for granted, and maybe they'll just be like, right. Well, like we just have to take causality for granted. But I don't know if that's really legitimate. I mean, like, even if you're a realist about causality, there's lots of different ways of conceiving of it. And I mean, causal realism isn't just a given. I mean, there are lots of people who take seriously more or less anti-realist views. So, I feel like if you're building that into your theory of rationality, you really want to have something to say about that.
Especially when the dispute here between causalists and non-causalists or evidentialists with respect to decision theory is centered around causation and the significance of causation. It seems like you want to talk about, well, what is causation, and then you can figure out whether that, whatever that is relevant to decision and in which way it is. I mean, you might be able to say, yeah, I guess we kind of share this background view of causation, and that's good enough to sort of assume that in the background and carry on the conversation from there, or it might not be. And I think there's sort of enough. I don't know. I'm just going to repeat myself, but I think it's in this case, it's in some cases you can have a conversation with someone if they share sort of background view of causation, but causation itself is a tricky enough topic on its own, and getting to a bottom of it here might be more helpful in resolving any disputes. Especially if anti-realist or less realist views of causation are very much on the table, as I think they are. Yeah, geez. That was the end of the notes that I had. I think we can probably wrap it up. We've been going for so long now. But yeah, it's been a really interesting conversation, discussion on some of these arguments.
Yeah, that was fun. Thanks a lot for inviting me on to have this conversation. I was a bit worried because I mean, like I mentioned to you, I ended up being a lot more busy. I didn't really have a chance to like prepare as much as I would have liked, and I don't know if that actually ended up coming out in the discussion. It seemed to actually go okay to me, but yeah. So, but no, I had my thesis is all like written now, and I sent it off to my supervisor. I got it back with like notes, and there were just a couple of things I had to change, but I wanted to get it done, and I don't know, I was just busy with that. So.
No, that's perfectly fair. Yeah, no.
Well, it seemed okay anyway. I might have made some blunders in there.
No, it went great. It was a. Thanks so much for doing that. It was not a problem. And especially thanks for sticking around so long. I know it's pretty late there. Probably.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm always awake at night anyway. So
fair enough.
This is a good time for me.
Yeah. So if people watching, make sure to sub to Kane B, check out his channel. The notes I have for this, people watching, they're available on the Patreon if you want to check it out. But yeah, post some stuff on there. Yeah, I think that's it. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you in the next one.
Bye.